I'm going to call to order this June 13th, 2023 special board meeting at 5:30 p.m. Board development, 5:37 p.m. Mr. Shook, may I have a roll call, please?
Yes. Greg Schneider.
Present.
Amy Levy.
Here.
Megan Miller.
Megan Miller?
Present. Present. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Sean Levy.
Present.
And Brian Anderson and Brian Nichols are not able to be with us this evening.
So we do have a quorum. We're on to our item 2A, board discussion, information, action, Board of Education self-evaluation. So we have board self-evaluation and school perceptions, and Rob Demuse.
Let me get my screen up here. While this is coming up, I heard some familiar names in there. We've met several times, either in person or virtually over the last couple of years, we did a community survey for some pre-referendum planning and kind of overall strategic planning a couple of years ago. I was there with you in person maybe in 2020 to go through a report that looked very similar to what you have tonight. So it's good to see some of you again. For the rest of you, it's really nice to meet you. What I have up here, it may look a little bit different than the report that you have in front of you, but the data is no different. But I didn't want to waste your time and read through every single item and the data. I figured that you could do on your own. That wouldn't be a good use of your time with me here. So I put this together just to kind of review what the tool is for, what we do, what we don't do, and just call out some of the things that caught my eye going through your report. But just know that nothing in my presentation is different than what you see in the report that was sent over to the district a couple of weeks back. For those of you that I have not met yet or haven't worked with yet, I am from School Perceptions. My name is Rob Demuse. I serve as the research director. Our mission now over 21 years has never changed. We want to help educational leaders, very much like yourselves, gather, organize, and use data to make strategic decisions. Really, the point of this slide, I skipped through it fairly quickly. It's not our first rodeo. We've done this many times for many years in many districts. More pertinent for you, the tool that you took, called the Annual Board Development Tool, or you may see it abbreviated to the ABDT several times tonight in the report. This is a partnership that we began maybe 15 years ago, something like that, with the Wisconsin Association of School Boards, or what I typically refer to as WASB. The ABDT identifies core skills that you as board members need, or you collectively as a board group need, so that all students achieve at high levels. And I won't bore you with all the trail of research, but it really is the honest to God truth, and the research backs this up well, that excellence in the boardroom leads to excellence in the classroom. There is a tight connection there, which is why I appreciate when school boards do take the time to take this tool, because it is very helpful. And there are three main purposes. The first is to expose board members to everything that you have on your plate. Second is to identify areas where you are aligned and where you disagree, and where further dialogue and discussion are needed. Disagreement is not bad. Disagreement is not a bad thing for any group. In fact, if you were all thinking the same thing all the time, I'd be a little suspicious of that. That's groupthink, and that doesn't do anybody any good. Now, respectful disagreement is a good thing, but it's not bad to be misaligned, provided that you have the opportunities to figure out why that misalignment is taking place. And then finally, you want to identify areas where board members are expressing an interest in receiving additional information, or in other words, where can you as a board pursue additional PD or additional training to fix some of the things that we'll go through tonight and celebrate some of the things that are going well. One of the things that I want to call out here is kind of the division of labor between what we do and what WASB does. So from our perspective, we want to make sure that we analyze the data well, so that you know what is going well and what isn't, and where disagreement among you exists. No matter if it's referendum planning or this or a staff survey or whatever the case may be, we don't necessarily do a lot of problem solution. So as things come up tonight, you're going to probably think about, well, how do we go about fixing this? We are not those people, but that's where WASB steps in, because they do have that rich training here, whether they have experience as being board members, whether they've been school administrators. They are really the ones to go to next to say, we want to solve X. how do we go about doing that? So in our world, we're kind of the problem identifiers, and WASB in this case is your problem solvers. The way that you took the tool, it was organized into 9 sections, or 9 pages, actually, as you took it: data-driven decision-making, board operations, culture, planning, budgeting, district operations, community engagement, policy, and vision. But no matter what the question was, all of the items that you answered, excuse me, were answered on this scale here. All of them are, or I should say, none of them are reverse coded. In other words, you want to be the higher the better on any particular answer. There's no question where 1 is good and 4 is bad, and sometimes 4 is good and 1 is bad. That's confusing it's confusing for me. It's confusing for a survey taker. As you go through this, just know that in a perfect world, every score would be 4.00. It never is for anybody, but that's at least what you're aiming for, is the higher the better on any given items. So can't be doing better than a 4, can't be doing worse than a 1. But 4 is an area that's fully achieved. It is an area of notable strength that you could use as a model for other districts. 1 is an area that you might want to think about how immediate improvement should be considered and what you're going to do next. Sometimes boards implement this at different times, and sometimes they will use it, a couple of weeks after an election takes place and board members are being seated. And there are times when a new board member simply may not know the answer to a question. If that's the case, and somebody says, I'm not sure, or I don't know, their data is scored as a 0, and then we remove zeros from the data. In other words, we don't want a 0 to artificially deflate your score just because somebody doesn't know. We don't want your score to look worse. So if you truly don't know, we don't let that figure into your results. It's only the people that have knowledge and have actually given you a score from 1 to 4. So let's begin with the indexes. Indexes in our case, no matter if it's this survey, a staff survey, parent, student survey, for many of these, we'll provide you with indexes. Indexes are kind of multi-purposeful, but in this case, it allows you to, as district leaders, to look at kind of an overall snapshot of your results. So it's good for you to kind of see overall from a high level, how are we doing? But it's also really helpful as and when you post something like this on your website in the name of transparency. You may find that people want to know how you're doing, but some people are more comfortable with data and some people are less comfortable with data. And so just showing the indexes sometimes is enough for people to see at a high level. Even if I'm not comfortable with deep data analysis, I can still kind of see how you're doing and how you evaluated yourself. And then there are key questions within the tool that are used to build each index score. So let's begin there. There are 6 indexes, so various questions from throughout the survey will feed these key indexes. What I want to call out here are 2. Relationships, you are really rocking that one. So what this is showing you here is the index labeled relationships, which I'll define for you in just a second. Your overall score is 3.70. You are 0.43 points above the state average at 3.27. Now, remember, you can't get better than a 4. So if you're looking for something to celebrate here, that is amazing. I mean, I only have 2 thumbs, but 2 thumbs up here in terms of your relationships. And I can see that even coming in tonight. I can hear you laughing. I can hear you joking with one another. And believe me, that is not the norm over the last couple of years as I step into board meetings now and then. But you are really rocking it there. That is something to celebrate. You're well above the state average in terms of your relationships. However, there you go. That was cool. I didn't know you could do that, Megan. Accountability, though, I'll define that for you in a second as well. That is an area where you're below the state average, so we'll talk about that one a little bit as well. But even eyeballing this here, there's only one index where you're below the state average. Otherwise, the other 5, you are all above the state average. So let's talk about that a little bit. Relationships. I labeled this in green because this is the one where you're above. That is defined as the following. Both the school board and the superintendent have essential leadership roles that are interconnected, but they are different. Effective school boards lead you as a united team with the superintendent, each in their respective roles, with strong collaboration and mutual trust. I like that definition, and it sounds good, but the honest-to-God way of saying that is you stay in your lane. Board members have their responsibilities. You have a certain element of responsibility as leading a district. You hire a superintendent to help manage your day-to-day operations, and you set goals for the superintendent to help fulfill, and then report back on how those are going. So this is kind of your swimming pool. Is everybody doing what they should be doing? And with the roles that we have assigned, Are we fulfilling in terms of meeting our goals, and are we getting along as we do so? Here, this is the one where you're going well. So what are some questions that fed that index? You'll see them listed here. So some things that are going well. We work with the superintendent in a spirit of mutual trust, open communication, trust, and confidence. 2, our board models mutual respect and professional behavior. 3, we value differences of opinion and do not let them degenerate into personality conflicts. 4, we encourage constructive and professional discussions at board meetings. And we honor our decisions outside of the board meetings, meaning we don't undermine majority decisions with which we may have disagreed, whether in the boardroom or outside. Again, disagreement is not a bad thing, but it may be the undermining or the going against the grain or not sticking with the majority view once a board has made a decision to move forward with something. Let's look at the other side of the coin. Some areas where you can improve. This was the index, the one and only index that was below the state average. That is defined as high academic standards, transparency, and accountability undergird a world-class education. True accountability depends on open decision-making, community engagement, support, and receptivity to new ideas and constructive criticism. What builds that index? Here, this is where you can start to put on your to-do list. Where do we want to focus our resource in order to improving over the next year? First, we ensure our standards are consistent with parent and community expectations. We have a schedule and protocol to review data and program performance. 3, our community believes the district is effectively governed and makes decisions with the best interests of students in mind. 4, we have a good understanding of the open meetings law and know how to navigate open sessions, closed sessions, and special situations such as hearings. And lastly, actually, this is the one from this section that you really did rock. We conduct an annual school board self-evaluation. You do, and you've done that for a number of years now. So actually, this did bring up your average in this section quite a bit, but the other ones were below the state average. You'll hear me say this a couple of times, so I apologize ahead of time for sounding like a broken record. But as I looked through your data, kind of the overall takeaway I saw is you understand your responsibilities, you understand what you're supposed to be doing, you understand what the superintendent's supposed to be doing, you understand your responsibilities separate from being a school administrator. You get along with one another, you have goals. And if there's one thing that seems to me that I'm taking away from your data, it's now kind of settling around this bullet point 1 here. How do we take the success that we've melded with one another and take that out to the community? How do we form relationships with our community, no matter who they are? And I use community in a very broad sense there. Community could mean staff members. Community could mean your parents. Community could mean non-parents, non-staff who never stepped foot into the school, but they do see the school district of Beloit as a line item on their property tax bill. So how do we take successes within this room that you have right now, and how do we share those? How do we build relationships with people who are not in the room with you right now? I'll revisit that point a couple of times, but I just wanted to cut to the chase now and let you know what I was seeing from a high level. Let's go into a few of these items. Here, these are specific survey questions that were in the tool. And when I say comparisons here, I'm looking at comparisons to others. I will get to your comparisons to yourself in a few minutes. That's the longitudinal data. But here I'm looking you as compared to other school boards across the state of Wisconsin.
Rob, may I interrupt before you really get going?
Yeah.
Your presentation, it seems like it is very valuable and it's separate from the report we have. Is it possible for us to get a copy of your presentation?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yep.
Another question before you move in. I'm looking at our survey from last year and the survey from this year. And in the indexes of relationship, community leadership, policy, vision, accountability. Last year, there was an equity category, and this year there's an experience category in the indexes. Can you what happened in the survey that changed?
Yeah, it's a good question. Essentially, not a lot other than renaming it.
Okay.
It is for the most part the same questions. There were some updates that WASB made. I know that they are. I guess I don't want to speak for them, and I don't know fully where they are in their process, but they're switching from the National School Board Association to the Consortium of state boards. I can't remember what the overall title is, but basically, as they develop a new framework, some of the questions changed, and as we did so, because the word equity has gotten politicized, we changed that to the word experience. People made a judgment about what that meant before they ever read the definition, and experience eased that a little bit. So it's really not much different in terms of what goes into it. It is a different label, though.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So in terms of your individual items, here, again, something to celebrate. As you look at what is that quick math? 59, did I do that right? Let's see, 30, 40, 59 items that you answered. Over half were above the state average. So 35 of the questions were above the state average. 19 of the questions were below the state average. And then there are some, actually, to that point, related to experience versus equity and a few other locations in the survey. There are some new questions. There are altered questions. And so those may not generate a comparison depending on when you implemented the survey. So 5 are NA, but takeaway from this slide is you have much more that are above the state average than below the state average. And as you're looking through that Word document that you probably have in front of you, you see a lot more green than red, provided it's printed in color, I suppose. So what did I pull out of that Word document? Your 5 items that are most above the state average. 1, we conduct an annual school board evaluation. Got a perfect score on that one. You fully achieved it. You're 0.92 points above the state average there. Second, perfect score. Can't get better than a 4.00, and that's what you got. I understand the basic principles of school finance, including state, federal, and local sources of income, and the school district budgeting cycle. In other words, everybody that took your tool, everybody on your board said that you have fully achieved that element of your of your goals. Another one, I'm going to skip down to the very bottom here and of what I have up. Another one that you landed a perfect score on. You're 0.8 points above the state average. Board members speak on behalf of the board/district only when authorized and clearly identify when they are commenting strictly as an individual. So 3 of your top 5 have perfect scores. 2 slightly below. We focus on strategic decisions and policies rather than on the administrative implementation of policy and other day-to-day management operational issues. This 2 is kind of the stay in your lane question. And then lastly, you are 0.81 points or a score of 3.50 on we have a legislative advocacy process to monitor issues and communicate our position to legislators and the WASB. Let's turn that coin over. What are the 5 items most below the state average? 5th from the bottom, our board meetings are effective and efficient. 0.87 below that average. We've explored sharing services with other districts and or local municipalities. And we benchmark test results against districts with similar demographics and prior performance over previous years. That is actually you have one more here at a score of 2. Our community believes the district is a responsible steward of its financial resources. The one that is most below the state average, 1.11 points below, is we have key initiatives in place to facilitate leadership succession and key administrative positions. Before I move on, let me just go back to your scale, just to remind you of where these are at. So I'm going to go back a few slides here. So as I'm talking about your lower scores and your 2s and your 1s, you saw several scores on that slide where you were below the state average that were rated a 2. That is what you have rated yourself as performance needs improvement this year. The one and only one that started to approach 1, the 1.40, that was the one on the bottom of that slide where you were talking about administrative positions and succession plans. That, as a board, you rated that as an area that immediate improvements need to be considered for yourselves. Back down. Let's talk about how you compare to yourselves. So now we're taking other school boards out of the equation. We're only looking at you. So this is, I believe, the next page in your Word document. Again, same info here. I just took rather parts just to summarize it a little bit. You made growth in a lot more items than you showed decline. So in roughly, well, over double, roughly 2/3 of the questions in your survey, you had growth relative to last year. 16 items did have a decline. 2, you scored exactly the same. And then again, you have some that are just too new, so you didn't take them last year, so year-over-year data isn't possible. So let's talk about the items with the most growth. This is where you made the most progress year over year. The first celebration, we have established clear strategies to accomplish our vision. You are 0.88 points, almost a full point above where you were last year on that particular item. Two, where you made about the same amount of progress, we have a process that allows key stakeholders, be it administrators, staff, parents, and or the community, to help create or refine vision and strategic priorities. And our board is represented at district and community events when possible. You're looking at about 0.75 plus or minus on those two relative to last year. And then finally, we make staffing and budget decisions based on student achievement priorities, and we regularly review our policies to ensure there are no barriers to equitable education for all students. Those two are areas where you made substantial improvement relative to last year. What about where you regressed? Let's talk about where your scores went down. You'll notice that the ones at the very bottom, it seems like the areas that you regressed fairly heavily based on what I was seeing, based on what you told yourselves, basically, but there weren't that many. So that's kind of what I'm taking away here. Growth or decline, not that many items, but the ones that you were seem to be an area of concern for you. We value differences of opinion and do not let them degenerate into personality conflicts. That one surprised me a bit. You had a perfect score that you gave yourselves last time around. I guess you can't get better than perfect. So if you're not giving your perfect, it's got to go down. But it caught my eye. You're only down to a 3.67, which is still something to celebrate. You know, that most boards would envy that. They would salivate over that number. I don't have a lot to say about that yet this year, but I guess it's something that I'm keeping my eye on, only because it kind of goes against the grain of your other survey data. Because your relationships is your highest index out of all of them, and you're really rocking it compared to other boards across the state. And you saw that earlier on in the presentation. So I guess, you went from a really high A to a slightly less A. I don't know, maybe you went from an A plus to an A. So again, I'm looking at movement here. I'm not necessarily looking at raw score, because your raw score at a 3.67 is very good. I just know that it's down from last year. So 2 data points do not make a trend, but 3 does. So I will be looking at that data item next year just to see whether it's still going down or whether it's kind of roughly leveled out compared to where you were this year. So not concerned, just my eye on it. The other one that caught my eye a bit, because I know that we had worked a little bit in your very early referendum planning process. I think we talked to EUA quite frequently. I think if I remember right, you have EUA on board for some potential facility work down the road. So we have a process to annually review the district's facility or maintenance needs. The fact that it went down surprised me a little bit. And I guess let me pause there. Looking at those 2 items, I'm curious to hear your reactions. Did you expect that? Did you not expect it? Are you surprised? I'm just curious to pick your brain there in the first 2 and see what your reactions are.
So the first one, I think, yes, you said we went from an A plus to an A. We're still working high in our relationships. However, we had a number of decisions to make this year that sometimes challenge and strain relationships. It's a little bit more conflict in some of the things that we had to do, but we still are respectful of each other.
Yeah.
And then the process of our annual review of the district's facilities and maintenance needs, when we started our work, or kind of one of the places we were at with the community survey is we were ready to move forward with another architecture firm, and we had a conflict and we needed to switch and work with someone else, and so we are now working with EUA. So I think at the time of us taking the survey, we were a little hindered in our referendum process because we were not able to get some work from the previous company. So that's what I would count for that for the facility maintenance needs, and have to have other board members speak to the other 2.
Nothing new to say.
Okay. The 2 at the bottom then, or in other words, where you saw the least amount of growth or where you saw declines in this case, are our board meetings are effective and efficient. And we have initiatives in place to facilitate leadership succession in key administrative positions. So you do notice that now with that score there. It showed up a couple of times, both in terms of your comparison to the state average and where you were last year compared to where you are this year.
I think like the effective and efficient part, like one of the things that we talked about is we've had a lot of things over the last year, or even going like into 2 years that we've been doing a survey, hiring a superintendent, a strategic plan, moving forward, and referendum planning, and so like just a lot of things. So we've had some very packed agendas. Need to get through some things. We're at a space where we're trying to recognize what the stamina of board members are for the work that we have.
Sure.
Board president, how to better plan an agenda so that we're not pushing ourselves to the space. Because when you're in closed session at 10 o'clock, you're not going to get the best of people.
I hear you.
So that I think part of that is reflective of that, about the effective and efficient. They're probably more on the efficient part because we've done the things that we need to do. And initiatives in place to facilitate leadership succession in key administrative positions. We did hire a superintendent. We have looked at our positions through a study of like how our district is organized. But as we have selected a superintendent this year, we've not really talked about succession in other positions, because right now, like we just hired a executive director of business operations. So we've just kind of finally gotten key hires in place and not got to the space of understanding the organizational strength or where there's backup and capacity in the organization.
Sure.
The only thing that I'll add briefly with respect to board meetings, I think we are effective and highly inefficient. And I think the reason why that number plummeted is, I would say a year and a half ago, we had pulled out of the inefficiencies and the super long meetings, and we had a taste of what it felt like to be out by 9, and then we completely regressed. So that number does not surprise me at all.
Okay.
And I think with the administrative positions, I think that probably went down as we realized that as we lost some of the senior staff or the key administrative positions, that there wasn't somebody necessarily that was ready to step into those positions here. So I think beginning to realize that maybe there wasn't a succession plan there.
Sure.
And we've had to bring people in to support the staff here to be able to be functioning properly. Also, I think, when Dr. Garrison came, he was talking about that his first thing is to work on who would follow up and make sure there's somebody prepared to step into that, which causes us to think more about it. And maybe we just realized that maybe we aren't as good as we thought we were.
Okay. So I guess what I'm hearing is we're not happy with the declines, but we're not shocked by them based on the experiences we've had over the last year. And we kind of knew maybe our homework going in before you got here is maybe my takeaway from that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's go on to the next part, which sometimes I open with. I think this next section is actually the most interesting, and I think it's the most valuable as you spend your time talking to each other over the next couple of weeks and months and plan for how you want to be a more successful board. It's your standard deviation analysis, and it's kind of tucked into the middle of your report. Forgive me if some of you have more of a stats background, but I also know, just in case you post this, I want to make sure that everybody in the audience, and if they're watching it later, is fully on board with where I'm going with this. The official definition of a standard deviation is a measure of how dispersed the data is in relation to the mean. The easier way to say that is how spread out are your responses. And sometimes I think an example is the easiest way to approach this. Say make up a question. On a scale of 0 to 100, how much do you like tacos? Okay, well, you could have a bunch of answers that are clustered right around the middle. You see 45, 47, 49, 50, 51, 53, 55. On your made-up question, a lot of this data is kind of shoved right in the middle. There's not much difference between 45 at your lowest and 55 at your highest. You could ask a different pool of people how much they like tacos on a scale of 0 to 100 and get much more spread out answers. Here, you go all the way from 1 all the way up to 99. In both cases, though, the average is 50. In your first sample data, though, the standard deviation is 3.16. In the second, it's 34.78. So averages are helpful, but averages can hide. Averages are friendly because most people know what an average is. They just see averages more so in their everyday life. Standard deviations are a little bit more foreign to people who aren't familiar with statistics. So the takeaway here is standard deviations aren't good or bad. There's zero positive or negative connotation with a standard deviation. All it's telling you is how spread out is the data. Carrying that over to your annual development tool, what that means is the data is kind of all over the board. Some people are saying we haven't started this. Some people are saying you fully achieved it. Some people are saying you're in the middle, but there's really no clusters of answers. So the reason I say this is worthy of discussion is as you get into this data, you might want to say, well, how do you feel about this? Do you feel like this is fully achieved? And the person next to you might say, we haven't even started that. So the fact that you're not all on the same page about where you are in the process, I think leads to the most valuable conversations to figure out why you've gotten to different answers. Again, that's not a bad thing. Disagreement is not a bad thing. The perception that you're different ways, different paths along the process are not bad. It's just something to note. It's a different way of looking at the data as opposed to an average. So let's look at the 10 items where you were most spread out, where you had the most all over the board answers. There were 3 that are above 1, so that's where I was kind of looking at here that are first stuck out to me. We invite legislators to our schools for tours and discussions of important education issues. And then 2 and 3 respectively, we have appropriate interventions and consequences for all staff and schools that do not meet expectations. And we clearly communicate our vision to our staff, parents, and community. Those are the ones right off the bat where you don't seem to have a lot of agreement on how you're doing there. Followed shortly by, we regularly communicate with our legislators on a particular subject or bill, and our meetings are effective and efficient. So I guess what that's telling me here, notice on the last row, overall that score is very low, but I guess there are maybe some of you that are giving that a higher answer than others. So the perception of that is interesting to me. The rest of these are all right around the same standard deviation score. We have a good understanding of the open meetings law and know how to navigate open sessions, closed sessions, and special situations such as hearings. If you have newer board members, that they may be scoring themselves a little bit lower here, even though you're evaluating the entire board. If you're less comfortable with that, you may give your overall board a lower score. A few items related to legislation or legislators or legislative issues. You see another one related to legislation here. There were 2 other ones on the previous slide. We invite legislators and we communicate with our legislators. So obviously in relation to local, state, maybe even federal government, sounds like some of you feel like you're doing a better job of communicating with those folks more than others. The exploring shared services, again, with other districts or local government entities, and then your partnerships with your local government entities, businesses, service, and community organizations as well. Again, this is not a good or bad. This is not positive or negative. It's just, this is where it's interesting, I think, where you're going to have your most fruitful conversations into figuring out why did you answer the way you did, and what can we do about that. Finally, then, survey section. So just, again, another way to slice and dice the data. I mentioned at the beginning that there are 9 different pages of your survey. Here, I just created an overall average of all the items from that particular page, and I put them in descending order. Your overall highest score were the items on the board operations page. Your overall lowest average score came from the items on the district operations page. So what does that mean? Let's wrap up the report here by looking at board operations. You had 3 scores here that you can't get any better on. You have perfect scores on the annual board evaluation. Do we do it? Speaking only on behalf of the district when authorized to do so, and evaluating the superintendent at least annually against clear goals and performances that we've set. So 4 items here you got perfect scores on, which is why your average was quite so high. What's interesting to me is, let me get rid of these little boxes for a second. Notice in the overall, the bottom right here, your score is 3.53. So that's a really good score on a score of 1 to 4 with this many items producing an average. So what caught my eye is your A would have been even higher had you not had this one item bringing you down on this one part. And again, this is not a new item based on the report. The board meetings are effective and efficient. This was kind of the only one that kind of sucked this score down a little bit, and your A would have been even higher had it not been for that one item. On the other side, what are some of these items where the survey page was the lowest? So just going back 2 slides here, District operations, you were at an overall score of 2.10.
So, you know,
What's that?
I said, the district operations being lower.
We
I
did
think,
when we took this.
no, but he's a sure.
So,
Rob, go ahead.
yeah, thinking about what goes into district operations, your lowest score to a score of 2.10. Some of your lowest overall items from the entire tool were located on this one page, which is why this one page looks so much lower than the rest. This staff authority and responsibility, the definition of it, the granting it at an appropriate level, communicating not just in this room that we're in right now, but out to the public, the expectations, priorities, and results that we have. Kind of the other direction, so not just going out to our community, but for the school community, meaning staff and parents, do we have a process in place to gather feedback from them? And then finally, the one that we talked about a second ago, the facilitating leadership in key administrative positions. I am not a good salesman, but I will tell you that if you are interested in staff, parent, and student surveys, to bring up the second from the bottom one, that is something that we do, and we can offer pretty robust comparison data there as well. So if you are interested in conducting staff, parent, and student surveys, in order to bring up that one that's at a 2.00 here, that is something we can help you out with. But this is the page, nevertheless, that you saw your lowest overall scores. So let me pause there again. I will send this report to you, but let me pause, just see questions or comments, things you want me to look at, things that you want me to address. Again, I'm not the best problem solver. That's a good question for WASB, but I certainly can help you rehash some of the data that you saw this evening.
Well, one thing for me, I think like in the board operations, those are things that the 7 of us at the time, 6 of us now, that those are things that we directly have impact on, how we behave and how we perform. And I think that, you know, our scores are, as we recorded them. In the district operations side, you know, we have Dr. Garrison now, but he started in November. And some of these are things that existed prior to him. So back to the district operations side, those, I think for me, those were like staff authority and responsibilities well defined and granted at the appropriate level. Being that we're on the board side, I don't really understand where all that space is inside the organization because that's day-to-day stuff. The regularly communicating our academic priorities and achievements, those are spaces that we've talked about data and having the data to give the community those presentations because those are some of the questions that were asked in this survey about that. A process to gather feedback from teachers and other staff. We do have our surveys that we have been working with another company, but this also specifically talked about employee handbook and personnel policies, and so those are some of the specifics and questions that kind of made me answer differently. And then initiatives in place to facilitate leadership succession in key administrative positions is one that we talked to already. But those are spaces where, like I said, our superintendent being new to us, we just haven't got to those spaces yet. Those are other things we're yet to define.
Sure.
Did all 7 of us take the survey?
6 of you did. I think maybe was there a resignation or an election? There were 6 respondents, and I think that was the total that you were expecting.
No, we had 7 at the time the survey was taken, and I think that's part of the issue there.
Yeah, that I don't know.
When it was open.
And as I look at district operations, I mean, the one with communication, I know central office, Dr. Garrison has a lot of communication that goes out through the community that they can access and is there. But as I looked at it as a board survey, as a board, do we do that? No. You know, we don't directly as a board do that. And that's a piece that I think maybe we're missing, that maybe as a board, we need to more periodically put out our own statement that says, you know, this is our expectations and so on, besides what the district puts out. And so some of that could be, we're just looking at specifically what does the board do and how much does the board know of what's happening? Because some of these are really more of the day-to-day operation. And it may be happening, we're just not aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
Megan is right.
Megan has her hand up.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, I fully support what Greg said. I know it would be really cool, and I think Dr. Garrison already has this planned because it's something that I had asked Ms. Moratek about for the end of the year or the school year for my committee. It was doing kind of like a state of the state or like a year in review, like at committee. So I'll let Dr. Garrison speak to that. I think that's something that's already being planned. So I think if we could further develop and entrench that concept, whether it's annually or biannually, that would probably help us bring that score up because I think it would illuminate just kind of like basically what just, Greg said, we would be a little bit more aligned and connected, right? Because like on the one hand, we don't want to be micromanaging and having our noses and stuff. And on the other hand, we don't want to be oblivious, right? So I think that would be good.
I didn't see. I just got a few emails from Michelle. I think that I had 5 minutes left about a half an hour ago. I didn't see that. I apologize. I didn't know you had other things behind. I didn't know what my time limit was. So I can hang up if you need me to, and I can certainly ask other questions through email. But I don't want to. I just saw those now. I apologize.
Yeah, we've got Drew. Is there any other thing from board members on the survey?
Thank you in advance for sending the spreadsheet. Is it okay if we reach out with email if after that the spreadsheet, the PowerPoint, if after we review that questions pop up?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to make sure, do you have the full report as well? Because this is only a snapshot. Do you have the full Word document? Because I can resend that as well.
How large is it? We have about a 20-page document. Is that?
Yep, that sounds about right. So yes, I won't resend that, but I will send what I have here. Yep, you bet.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yep, take care. Thank you.
I listed 13 as the one who said that like those are specific things that we could work on with our standard deviation of being greater than page 13.
Here, we should write yours.
When I get to the next statement, I gotta be there. Put it on the agenda.
Yeah. All right.
Hello, thank you.
Hey, Drew.
Hey, Amy. Hi, Greg.
Hey, how are you?
Sean.
How you doing, Drew?
I'm good.
All right, we are now done with 2A board self-evaluation. And we're moving on to 2B, collective commitments, Board of Education superintendent roles and responsibilities. And two things are clarifying, our collective board commitments, and then our clarifying responsibilities. And we're with Drew Howard.
Hey, Megan.
Hey, Drew. It's so nice to see you. Sorry I couldn't be there in person tonight.
Yeah, good to see you too. And I understand we're not, Ryan's won't be here. But you're here in person.
I'm telling you, it's a good night.
Good. Before we dig in, I'm curious, what are your top of mind reactions to what you learned tonight with the survey?
I was really pleased. Oh, I just cut you off, Miss Levy. I'm sorry. No, I thought it was a very accurate depiction. I mean, it's like we're not going to be, you can't get 4s on everything. I thought it was an honest look at, the progress we still have to make, but also the progress we've made. And I feel really encouraged by it.
Thanks, Megan.
Nothing new to add.
Yeah, I feel encouraged by what's there. And I think it will help us really sit down and talk about what are the things we have to focus on next. What are the things, I've done some development stuff where they compare development as like a barrel, and each of the tasks are one of the studies in the barrel. And so you can only fill the barrel to the bottom one. So as you work on the bottom and build that one higher, move it up, you hold more water, and you keep going around and moving up until you complete the barrel and fill it. And so that's kind of what I see as we go forward and say, okay, here's the low areas that we really need to focus on. Here are some areas that are a concern. And so we look forward to and improve them. So I'm just encouraged to help us to define what our next steps are, what we need to move forward
All right,
on, to make it even better.
I'm encouraged also, one, I think like in our my first survey in April 2021, I don't know that we had anything that was in green. Last year, the relationships were in green. And then this year, everything is in green except for the accountability. So I think that is, over the last 3 years, 2.5 years, the development of us as a team, the core of us, the 7 that have been here. And then the areas that were lower, like that effective and efficient part, I do understand that as some of the stress of like the agenda planning and things that are there. Like I said, it has taken, it does take a noticeable hit and affect our overall score. But I think I would say like that we have a higher score in board operations, meaning that those of us who are on the board feel that we are successful in our work together, that's not where we started at. And if we're able to do our job well, we feel that we're setting the conditions for the district to be able to perform. So it's not the 7 board members that are holding the district back. And so, continue to improve on those things. And as we're with our superintendent now, that we have a superintendent, continue to grow that relationship so that we're that effective board and district administrator team as we bring the rest of the district along.
Right. Good. What were your thoughts?
I think, when you're looking at the survey, naturally I didn't take the survey, so the board kind of responded to, it makes sense to me. I think we have areas where we can grow naturally as a team. That's a part of every board superintendent relationship. So even in areas where we very high, when I'm doing strategy deviation conversations, even like in class and whatnot, I always tell people, well, that was the snapshot at that time too, right? Like that was the snapshot at that time, at that moment. Your feelings, your emotions, what was transpiring. And if I look at that time, let's just say it was someone to me in early May. There was a lot of different things going on in early May, right? There was a lot of different feelings and emotions that were happening in early May. Or if it was earlier than that, there was a lot of different things that were happening. So you just gotta remember that what you saw was also a snapshot of time based off of what was going on at that time with the board and the superintendent.
Right.
And so maybe things were a little different in that area where we could possibly improve in, based off of a different time. And so, just information I'm thinking about.
Yeah. So one of the reasons why my BOE files, because it is I tend to keep things. And one of the things I happen to keep is the report, not knowing that this was gonna happen tonight. This is from the 2021 annual report, where green was missing in action as a color. And ironically, of all the key work areas, the one that had the biggest gap, the biggest red, was relationships. 1.17 below the state average. So very different today, even with your state. The fact that it was taken when it was is a variable. But I remember that this was one of the first times that you had done this, or it was your first repeat. And there was just, there was just some data that was troubling. And Megan, you remember that when you and Dan and I, started planning these sessions, that a lot of it was, not a lot of it, some of it was in response to what the data was telling, with all the caveats that go into when it was taken and who was on board, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. Great, it's wonderful progress. So let's continue progressing.
Was something? Okay, I'm gonna make a statement. I think the board has to know from me too, like, I appreciate our opportunities, like, to grow together. I really do. I think it's an important piece for our school district community to see that as well. and to hear this as well. And so I appreciate the opportunity that we have like today, like so folks can see that, hey, yeah, we don't always agree, and there's some things that we want to get better at. But the board and the superintendent in this case, we are trying to work to be better, and that's a process. And so I just want to make sure that y'all know that from the superintendent's perspective, that's an important piece that I think our district needs to, keep seeing.
Right, thank you.
I would add to that then, it's just like when board member Winfield and Brian Anderson joined the board, and they said that they felt welcome. That was important to us as board members because that's what we were trying to do, is create a welcome environment for those who had not yet served with us. And as we were going through the search, the superintendent search process, it was our goal that by demonstrating that we're a board that is working on development, that a person could come and join us and you'd have a partner in trying to be better. And so those are the things that we're trying to demonstrate to our district, like I said in the answers before. So I really want to say thank you to board member Levy and board member Miller, because they are our two longest serving board members. Board member Schneider, who was appointed and then ran and came back. So he's continued in that service. And then, like I said, to our newcomer, Brian Nichols and Brian Anderson, as we're all working in that space together. But for Dr. Garrison to be able to offer that, that's kind of validation to us that the things that we're trying to do are happening.
Yep.
Just because it hadn't been our story in Beloit.
Yeah, Jared. Several times, several of you said we want to change the narrative, quote unquote. And these are great ways to start changing the narrative. And there are some people, I suspect, in your community that want another narrative, but I have a little data to support that. But
Sometimes.
yeah, we can't control that.
No.
We can't control what we do. So you're doing great work, and that is the foundation of your number 7 board collective commitments. It's the cornerstone of your work. It helps you focus on issues, etc. So, all right. Well, one of the topics that was covered in that survey, which you seem to, according to that data, be doing relatively well at, is this whole idea of being really clear about roles and responsibilities, or lanes as is commonly referred to. And we've talked about this, and several boards ago, April 2022, we actually did an exercise, and you may recall this, where we looked at certain activities and situations that occur. And we had a discussion about who owns them. Does the board own them? Is that their responsibility? Does the superintendent, or is it an activity we do together? And there's documentations on how you responded to that back in those days. And when Dr. Garrison came on, he said, that was then, this is now. I want to make sure we collectively are clear about those things. And some of them probably are clear, maybe many of them, or maybe even most, are same as last time, but maybe there's some differences. And so we've agreed that we wanted to have that discussion again. And a very similar process as what we did last time. So if you see these bright colored pieces of paper, you may go, oh yeah, that's right, I remember when we did this, right? So these are 30-some different situations that come up. I've added a couple more since we did it back in the day. And this gives us a chance to basically have a discussion about where these might fall.
Megan has her hand up.
Okay.
Hey guys, before we get started, I just want to interject. One of the reasons, Drew, and you'll remember this conversation, that we started this work was not only to create and kind of create the culture of continuous improvement, but it was also to sort of like entrench ourselves and sustain that progress. So I really appreciate that we're doing this again. I think it's a great, valuable use of our time. And I think that we should consider as a board revisiting this every April as our board may change, just to like affirm and tweak as needed, because it just like kind of furthers the clarification and kind of sustains that culture of like awareness and mutual respect and continuous improvement.
Great, thanks, Megan. So from my experience, this is one of the main reasons superintendents leave a district, is because his or her understanding about his or her responsibility and the board's is different. That people start getting out of their lanes, not because of intent of disruption, but just because they think they're doing the right thing. But sometimes what I think is the right thing gets in the way of how we have an efficient and effective board meeting, which was one of the dimensions. So I think to Megan's point and others, it's imperative people understand these lanes, and when we get out of it, again, not for lack of intent, being disruptive, just to make sure we're clear about it. So just the activity itself helps us to retool, remind ourselves to stay in these lanes. Okay.
You know, Drew, one of the things even as we're going, I think what I found beneficial in this activity was the discussion of the you know, when you look at the 30 or so items that you have, sometimes that talking through of why is that a board responsibility, why is that the superintendent's responsibility, why are we seeing that as both, but then also now, because we have worked together, we do have some context to kind of put that space in, and sometimes I see you got an agenda in a regular meeting, you don't just have the opportunity to kind of free flow and talk about things, and we are in a public meeting, in an open session, so there's an opportunity to have some kind of just dialogue about some of these things.
Absolutely.
Different.
That is the beauty of scheduling professional development and board development outside of regularly scheduled meetings.
Amen.
That's why we're here, because it was brought up and it's been acted upon.
I'm just saying kudos.
Thank you for the reminder.
No problem. Here to help.
Didn't know that, but I-
And this is the first time I've come here in the daylight.
Yeah.
And I will leave in the daylight.
Look here.
So-
Won't he do?
It's because it's summertime.
Well,
We don't
no,
get dark till 9 o'clock. We get dark at 4:30 sometimes. But yes, that's a great one, Drew. That is great, yes.
All right. So I think some of these are gonna be pretty straightforward, but as I say that, I've done in some districts, we've gotten into conversations, it's like, wait a minute, I guess this isn't as straightforward as it could be. So here's the process. Is you'll notice I refer to these A, B, C, D, E, 1 through 7, because otherwise it's that one over there, right? So I'm gonna ask, and Megan, I'll even have you kick it off, I don't know, can you see these numbers okay?
I'll zoom in.
You'll, okay. But is to choose one, like, B6 or E4, just whatever, then I go it. And then the question is, to whoever calls that out, where do you think it belongs? Does the board own it? Do you own it together? Or does the superintendent own it? And to clarify, when we say superintendent, it doesn't mean your superintendent does these things, but the superintendent is responsible for it being done by his team, right? Good? All right.
Come on, Megan Miller.
All right, Megan, it's like
All
Jeopardy.
right. So in the spirit of full transparency, I see a lot of pink, but not much else.
E1.
So we're gonna go. No, we're gonna go B3 because it rhymes. Okay.
Okay, and I'll read it for you. Interviewing administrative candidates to hire. Where does that belong in your opinion?
In my opinion, that is a superintendent lane.
Okay? Are we all good with that?
And this is where, if you have something to clarify, or you're going, you might see it a little different, this is where,
Clarification.
Yeah.
So like, yes, that's a day-to-day operation event. Dr. Garrison is a superintendent. He's gonna interview people, conduct the process. But I think that the important part for our district, where we've been here before, another part is that our human resource committee is the full board.
But that's his interview. You don't
Right,
interview.
right. We're
That's
not-
not approved hires.
So that's for hire, right? And that's not there, but this is a space.
But we're only dealing, if I'm right, with what's on the card, correct? We're not
Right.
rewriting the card.
no, but we can use these as an opportunity just to clarify maybe the
But can
difference.
we do that if that's not included on the board? Because I feel like that will come up later.
I feel like it won't come up later, that's why I wanna do it now.
Well, let's see. But right now it says interview, and we all agree, your superintendent and their staff, that's their job.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Megan.
So when they interview to hire, that's not the end of the process though.
Right.
Because that recommended candidate comes to the board, and in that committee, I don't know what a board will do. A board may or may not choose to hire, take action to give the job to that person. That is a possible outcome.
So this is what I will bring up respectfully. I think this is how we become inefficient. Because as I understood the rules, it was E7, read that card, and we're gonna categorize it. And when we morph it into something else, I think that's how we leave when it's midnight.
So here's my suggestion is, if you have a point you wanna make in the differentiation between approving versus interviewing and so on, we do what you say, let's stick with the cards, but when we're done with the cards, say, okay, now I'd like to clarify a couple things.
If it hasn't already been covered, like
Correct.
make a note,
Yeah,
and if it hasn't been covered by the time we clear the board, then absolutely.
okay.
All right, and I wanna offer this as a counter. As we do this activity together, we have one new superintendent to us. We've got a board where we're used to kind of operating in a norm and a space. And the benefit of tonight, as we talk about these responsibilities and where they sit with a superintendent and with a board, and we've been able to have the opportunity to do some of these things together. And some of these things are situations that we will encounter at some point, but we have not encountered them yet. But the benefit of tonight is having an opportunity to kind of discuss some of it. I think it deconflicts us before we get to a space where sometimes there is conflict. And and as one board member, just because you don't see it doesn't mean that it's not there or a potential for conflict.
All right. Thank you, Megan. Amy,
A1.
A1, establishing student discipline policies. Where do you believe that goes, Amy?
I think that's both, because policy is typically recommended by the administration and it's reviewed and approved by the board. So establishing discipline policies is a process.
And you believe it's a shared responsibility. You agree with that? Megan, I'm gonna assume you agree with what you're hearing unless you chime in, yep?
Absolutely, yeah. I will, sorry, I will jump in for sure.
Okay,
I'm gonna throw something different in our last one, so I would assume that your opinion changed.
Something different from what's on the,
When we did this 1 year ago, our board said that establishing student discipline policies is a board responsibility.
what's your point? I missed it, my
Okay,
apologies.
so for the four of us that are here today,
Mhm.
last year, when we did this, we said establishing policies, student discipline policies was a board responsibility. So right now, when you just pull it off the board and you say, I think that's a both, I understand you may have had an evolution and change, but
Just
I'm like,
because the board said it doesn't mean Amy Joyce said it. And Drew asked me to pick a card and decide where I believe it landed. So that's what I did.
so then my question is, we're going through, Drew, that I noticed that it seems like, well, one member has pulled a card, just we're participating. But if we were doing the same as last year, then we have, we had a change in our belief from year to year. Or one board member said something, that's why I pointed out the difference.
Are we gonna compare and contrast everyone as we go?
Well, I mean, to a degree, I'm saying,
So it's changed,
What is-
and I think it's an interesting question, so why?
because now the other part I'll add to this is like board member Levy said, Drew asked me to pick a number, I picked a number and I put it where I thought it belonged.
Isn't that the instruction?
Yep. And then we would open it up
Right,
for,
but my point is that tonight there's 4 of us. And I think what we're looking at on this page from last year was where we collectively established the will of the board, this were all 4 of them, all the quorum that was there that night landed.
But I think we're creating, we're not revisiting. And it's not a problem to do contrast, but the people that Dan's not here, other people aren't here. So let's see what our picture as our current board looks like. That's where I want to invest my energy.
So and then the other point that I just add, and I'll step back from this space, and I'm bringing this point up is because our individual thoughts and opinions are individual thoughts and opinions. But tonight there's 4 of us. At a full board right now, there's 1, 2, 3, 4.
There are 5 people at the table, and so
But-
board and.
Right, but I'm saying there's 4 board members tonight. We've got 6 right now, we're gonna do our work to get to 7. And the thing that I'm underscoring is the work that it takes for the quorum of the board to establish this is what the board thinks.
Right.
And so that's the part that in all of the work that we do, I don't think that we can underestimate what that actually takes to get us to a place where we're in agreement. And then again, we're in agreement with our superintendent in the work that all of us have to do and how we're going about it.
so Amy says it belongs there. And I look and I say, do you agree with that?
Based on the description that Amy had, with the knowledge that we work together to do it, the superintendent has a piece and the board has to approve it, I agree that it's together.
I agree.
And just to provide context, establishing the policy, I think is definitely joint. Now, if that had said approved policy, then that's the board.
The recommended change.
So, yeah, that's where the words can make
Yeah,
a
that's-
big change in it, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, good. Great.
I'll go with E1, establishing budget priorities. I think that's together.
Okay.
Because ultimately, the board is the one that approves the budget. And will set priorities for it, but it's still the superintendent and the team that will look at the district and build the budget where it has to go. So it's working together to establish.
Okay.
I agree.
John?
Yeah, I agree. The thing that I would add to it is for our current context is we have a strategic plan now. We're working in new budgeting processes that we didn't have. But I think also for the situation we're in our financial position, there are things that Dr. Garrison is doing to show us savings also. And so those are some things that I think we have to be attentive to as he establishes or shows us some savings in budgeting areas. What action we as a board take after that's been found because of our situation.
Okay. Good. Billy's good. Megan?
Sorry, it took me a second to get that button. Looks good.
All right. Great. All right. Billy,
Approving curriculum changes.
which one are,
Oh, I'm sorry. 5C.
approving curriculum changes, where do you believe that goes?
Typically, we would bring the curriculum to the committee. I feel like there was a space between it together and the superintendent would be there. But, I think it should belong together.
I disagree. If it's approving curriculum changes, that's something the board does.
Great.
Again, it's the difference of that word approve. Ultimately, it's the board that approves the changes. I mean, class changes, adding classes, leaving classes, those things all come here. Purchasing new curriculum and things would typically come to the board for approval. But again, it's administration that comes forth and does the recommendation to the board, and this is where we think we need to go. But because it says approving, I would say good with the board.
Megan?
I was going to point out that same nuance that board member Schneider just pointed out. It is obviously a joint effort, but the approval piece is a board piece. Is there something, I mean, I guess I'm interested in what Dr. Garrison feels like about, like, do we want to keep the wording and make it like a board or I guess I'm a little, are we on just, it's a board thing? Because if we're on it's a board and a both thing, do we want to add some language to it to make it a little bit more reflective of that nuance?
I think that's not the rules of the game. The game is to read the card, and where does that card go, not to rewrite the card unless I'm missing something.
And if it would be helpful, you could write a new card if you felt it belonged somewhere else in addition to this card.
So I'm gonna add again, I thought.
That makes sense.
Look, I'm for, it's a board thing because it's approving the curriculum changes. I understand in the process, the administrators would come with this starting course proposal, this is the curriculum we want to purchase, and all that would go to the committee. So when that change happened, it would happen because that's what they brought forward, like the Teaching, Learning, Equity, Service Committee. But again, I think the important part, as we started out before, is that Dr. Garrison has stated something that's different than what the 4 board members are thinking initially as we went through this process, is that we have to be able to talk about these things and get to that space, because in our work, he would perceive that this is his thought, and we would perceive that this is where the 4 of us are thinking tonight, and that would be a potential space of conflict, or wait a minute, where are we at? And that's why we're at the table tonight talking about these things.
I see I guess in my brain, I wouldn't bring a curriculum to the board for approval if I hadn't had conversations. Or like, talking about, hey, this is a change that we need to start thinking about making, or, hearing your thoughts about, let's just say, sex education, and so I get the word approving is there. I get stuck at where I start in my brain.
But that says approving.
I know it's
Right.
And the superintendent and the team, the administrative team, doesn't vote to approve anything.
Right, so the thing that I would say in that, and just how you described it, the part that I would say is like, even in this conversation, how we have conversations with board president and superintendent, like, I don't know what the other 6, I know what I think. I don't know how the other 6 board members may think. Even on some things, if you took it to each other individually, which is kind of how you'll find your level with certain things, when it comes time to vote, I don't know how people are gonna vote. And so that's a space where I think that, like, understanding that approving part is, this is what's got brought to the board. It has moved however it has moved through that process. And then when it got in front of those 7 people to vote, they're gonna do what they do.
This just captured all the things that went on to get to this
It
point.
says approving.
Right, but again, it says approving.
Right.
But the benefit of the reason we're doing is having the conversation.
So I'll just add
I
this.
think maybe you have a different, I don't know.
The way my brain works is, if it says approving, deal with approve, because I think this is something we do as a board. I think we're an amazing team. But I think oftentimes we do too much and not enough at the same time. And I think sometimes we overthink things like this and run through all the nuances when it simply says approving curriculum changes.
Well, the thing that I would say to that is, obviously everyone in here can read. But when you read a word or you look at something, you still might see it differently. And I think what's important, and this is a difference where I think that even, we might all have our own individual preference on how to move through some group processes. But that's the point, is they're group processes, they're not individual processes. And so, like tonight in this space, exploring the difference of what Dr. Garrison thought when he looked at that and what the 4 of us thought when we looked at it.
May I ask a clarifying question?
Clarifying question.
What's the difference in approving? Because here's the thing, what we're discussing, that's not what's on the card. So I don't. That's the part where you lose me, because I don't think there's disagreement on what approving means.
No, I'll say this. As we just did this activity, 4 board members agreed, this is what this means. But I think the difference and what's important is to understand why our superintendent thought something differently than the 4 of us, and to make sure that we're able to amend that space. So moving forward, or if we've ever in that situation, it's something that we've all thought about already.
So in light
That
of,
to me, that's the benefit of this activity.
so in light of the discussion of that particular card, with the emphasis on approving.
If the emphasis is on approving it, that's what it is.
Yeah.
I'll share what I thought when I was
Mhm.
reading.
Yep.
Right, I wouldn't look at my brain, straight up to something that I don't think the board is gonna be, with me in this major conversation, especially around curriculum.
Let me ask a clarifying question. If it says approving, and you agree that approving is the board, why would you think, and maybe you didn't, so please tell me if you did, why would you think something other than approving after reading approving?
So in my brain, I'm approving what the curriculum is going to be brought forward, in my brain.
But you're recommending.
Well, I'm just telling you.
Okay.
Yeah, I just told you what I thought. I'm approving because my team talks, I'm looking at curriculums and we talking about what's there, what's not there. I'm like, well, I don't know if that's let's bring the team together, let's talk about it.
Right.
We're looking at all of that before it even jumps to a major conversation where it has to say, here are our different companies we're looking at. There's 1 or 2, 3, and then there's a lot of pre-work that comes before.
So do you still see that as approving or recommending?
Like I said, I saw it as approving, because I'm looking
I
at.
mean, not post-conversation. Like, do you still see that as your role is to approve or to recommend?
Well, no, based on the card, this is y'all will approve the curriculum, correct? When I first read the card, I'm looking at all of this from a superintendent's perspective. I'm looking at the math curriculums before we can bring it to you all. I'm thinking, okay, which ones could better fit needs of our kids? We put together teams, we start looking at the processing, we're bringing in companies. And then I'm like, okay, well, A or B, I could go with. And then I'm bringing it to you all for the final group.
Okay, yeah, because ultimately in your mind, you're approving the curriculum that's coming to us.
I'm looking at all that.
But yeah, you're bringing it as a recommendation. Personally, I don't think there's anything that's in the list that the board is responsible for that isn't done in conjunction with the superintendent. I mean, anything that's here, all of the pre-work and everything else is done by administration and comes to the board with recommendations to the school board. We may be the only one with the authority to approve or disapprove.
There's some parts in all of the work that.
But in all of the work, even because it says approving, okay, that's the board responsibility to do that piece. But I think in anything that ultimately is the board's responsibility, it's always done with information that we've gained from the superintendent. Right, that I don't think there's anything that the board does in isolation of the superintendent. Okay.
That's why I initially put it together. But I mean, if you're looking at this verse strictly approving, that is a final step that you will have to say.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with that.
Okay.
That's the all the ones.
John?
The goal is to clear the board, right?
Yes.
No.
What did the board?
I don't agree.
He just said yes.
The board, the goal is to find
Let him
a home
facilitate.
for each of these.
Right, now let me ask a question, Drew, because board member Levy asked, the goal is to clear the board. I understand that there's X amount of things to talk about. And this is the part where it would be different, because I'm not trying to drive away from your facilitation. What I'm finding useful, and I think is important, just like this last conversation about approving and recommending, I think that is where the need for our work is. However, some of these I think will go faster than others, but I do think that, for me, as a value in, because we could be done in 2 minutes, just put everything in a space.
I hear you.
It's the conversation that's going on, because you have a superintendent, perfect, just as one example, four board members thought one thing, superintendent thought something different. We've had these exchanges, we have an understanding that's different than what we had when we started. Those are areas of conflict. in real life in this work. So I think that that's the part of like, I'm not just trying to hit them 1, 2, 3,
Yep.
we're done.
Yep.
That's why I started like this in the beginning.
You didn't say rush it, I just wanted clarity that the goal was to clear the board.
I'm gonna say again, sometimes we might not get done in a lot of time. With all that there, the conversation might take different forms and ways. So I didn't even I understand wanting to get done, but I wasn't trying to make getting done my 100% goal. For me, I'm asking that we had the 4 of us here tonight and Dr. Garrison. To me, I'm more than getting everything off there. If we got 16 of them over there, there's 32 of them, the understanding that we created around whatever 16 got there was important to me.
Yeah.
So I didn't know, I just didn't want to be,
Yep.
you
I
know,
think you're
And
I know I'm
and
next.
I think we can do both.
okay. Right.
So, you're up.
Directing staff discipline.
Will you help me? Here.
Yeah,
Just give them a letter and a number.
D4.
All right, D4.
Maybe that one to the superintendent. So I think that's the management of the day-to-day operation.
Directing staff, discipline, superintendent. Okay.
Absolutely.
Amy, Megan? All right.
But you, Maggie Meggs, as Mrs.
Megan has established if she disagrees, she'll yell.
Yeah.
Where was that at?
Megan, you're up. Which room did you like?
Again, it's kind of hard to see, but I think it's A2. Are we good?
Okay, addressing complaints from teachers.
That's a great one. I'm glad I picked that one. So, I mean, I feel like that is that lives in administrator world. However, there's also perhaps a board space for that. We have a past precedent of like, receiving information from the BEA. I don't know. I mean, I'm inclined to put it in both, just with the understanding that we should have a relationship with our teachers union at minimum. But I think the addressing part makes me kind of lean toward mostly administrative, because they're the ones that would actually like take the action to address it, unless I'm missing something. So sorry for the wishy-washy answer, but I mean, I guess I'm administration, but kind of curious to hear what my colleagues think about what that means for the board's relationship.
So I'll jump in.
Please do.
For me, I would have a different take if that said resolving, because I think that's administrator land. Addressing complaints, if a teacher is coming to me as a constituent about an issue, not about like I don't agree with this PD or whatever. So I think that's where the nuance lies for me. But I think our board does a really great job of redirecting. And I think that redirection for me could fall under addressing it. I didn't resolve it, but I addressed it and I redirected you. If the teacher has a problem, my first question, have you talked to your building leader? If you weren't able to resolve it with the building leader, did you speak to someone at CAC? If you are, so is that redirecting, I think falls under addressing. If that said resolving, so I say both. If that said resolving, I would say that's the superintendent and his staff.
Okay.
Yeah, fully agree with you. Thank you, Amy, for articulating that so beautifully.
Here to help.
I agree with that explanation.
I'm just gonna add more to it. Those are like 15 and 16, and just last time we made those the superintendent responsibilities. But kind of like when I read addressing complaints from teachers, because things do come to us from staff members, and usually the things that they're talking about are organizational life things that are in their work. And we're in the 7 of us, we're at the end of the process, nowhere in the beginning or the middle. So those are things that usually come to us and they're sent back to the district administrator. Dr. Garrison, a teacher, brought this forward. Is this something you can address?
Yeah.
And then it's left for the superintendent to resolve it.
That's the redirect you had
Right.
talked about.
So I would put that into the superintendent space, and that's where we put it at last time, because it's kind of like it's been heard, but it's sent back out. So I don't know, I would call it a board and superintendent together, because we don't ignore the stuff that people send, but it is redirected to.
So you have a
source.
part in it.
Well, if it's sent to me, it's emailed to me.
Right, you don't ignore it, exactly.
I think it should be in super.
And your role might be to help to redirect, but ultimately, it's the superintendent, administrative job to address that through the chain of command as it exists.
So this is a perfect example. It sounds like you're in the superintendent camp with Dr. Garrison, and the three of us are saying that's both. So where is that place?
Well, tonight it would be, in both, because that's where I don't know, that's 3 to 2.
In my notes, I put it under superintendent with a capital X and under together in a small x.
Oh, great.
Because it really is, it's the superintendent's responsibility ultimately to deal with the complaint,
I think to resolve it.
to resolve it. But we have, if it's coming to us directly, we need to make sure that it gets to the superintendent. Because if he doesn't know about it, like, he can't
Can't
address it.
resolve it.
So I guess it's
So I
a
think maybe
nuance.
tonight, you're saying addressing both, because addressing by us is sending it to places that it properly belongs.
I think that's part of addressing it. Now, again, if that's in resolving it, that's Dr. Garrison and his team.
Like at the end, I think, where is it end?
But that's not what the card says. Card says addressing it.
Yeah, I can do what the car said. Totally understand that, but at the end of the day, that's coming to me.
Absolutely.
So that's just being a superintendent.
Yeah.
And that's my route.
I heard you.
The beauty of it tonight is nobody said we're trying to solve it individually. We all said we're gonna send it to him, so I mean, right?
So 3 to 2, it looks like that goes together. Who's
I mean,
next?
that's what I was thinking. Well, we just have it,
And I'm putting in parent to resolve,
but I think
If it's to resolve, that's the superintendent.
right, just to clarify the nuance.
Yeah.
but what I would say right now is that we've established, what everybody understands is if something came to you, you would send it to the superintendent to say.
Right.
That's how you would address it.
Yeah. That's right.
Read the card, people, read the card.
I mean, this has multiple meanings though. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm not gonna
it
get into
does.
the nuances of it. This has multiple, we go.
That's you getting into the
I know,
nuance,
but
just own
it
it.
has multiple meanings. Address
Right, that's why we're gonna read the card.
Or words got definitions.
They, every one of them.
Nuances, there's, there's meaning, there's meaning.
At the end of the day, okay, well, let's keep on.
Yeah,
So, okay.
All right.
People start doing something different, what we know is what we thought to that years. That's.
Am I up?
you're up.
All right, I'm gonna say B1.
Creating student discipline policies.
Isn't that what I said? Okay, okay, hold on. Establishing student discipline policies, okay, so establishing and creating, we're saying are different.
Well, they're different cards.
Well, I'm assuming you made the cards, right? So I wanna talk to the author.
The way I read this.
No, listen, hold on, Bibi, you're being disruptive. Did you mean to have to, hold on. Joy is quieter. Did you mean to have 2 cards so closely written? So establishing student discipline policies and creating student discipline policies.
I don't recall my intent.
Okay, so we're gonna say yes, and there was a brilliant reason they are different. I am going to say that goes into superintendent and team, because what traditionally happens is that if there is a policy issue where something needs to be created, the administrative team will work with legal if necessary to create that and then bring it to the policy committee for review and edit. So the creating, I'm gonna put with superintendent and team.
All right, great.
I agree.
Okay, great. Sean?
I'll agree.
Look at us.
Look at. We're rolling.
See how establishing differs from creating?
That's good. Greg?
Oh,
Well, go ahead. This is
I'm doing random, I didn't look at it, I don't know what's up there, B2 is.
B2.
Develop policies about school facilities. Again, policies is the role of the board. But again, it's gonna be the superintendent or an administrative team that brings forth a recommendation on it. And as we review policies and change them, we get a recommendation from the superintendent and administration and or legal that also may have some modifications. And then it comes to the policy committee where we make it look like we want it to look like and then go from there. So, but if the board actually approves it, but to develop the basic part that comes out of the superintendent's office.
See, I differ slightly. I would say that's together. And the nuance that I'm using for consistency is the first go, the creation, I think comes from admin. But the development includes the edits in my mind. And that's where the policy committee and then ultimately the full board comes in. So I would say that's together, the development.
I agree with Amy in the development piece because of how our committee is structured.
Okay. John?
So in our developing policies, like there are administration suggestions in the committee process. Some of those are taken on, some of them might not be taken on. If it comes out of committee, it's going to the full board and the full board ends up approving it. But that development, like I said, I know policies is the area of the board, but the how we get to the policies that we have, it is a process that happens together.
I still see that as superintendent. But I can go together. I mean, because I wouldn't, what I'm looking at, I mean, I'm internal, so I see things. You're not in the facilities. I'm looking at the stuff.
Not at all.
Correct. I'm in the facilities. I'm looking at what the problem is. I'm developing what I need to bring to you all. Consideration, recommendation, consideration. I see that starting with me. Well, I see that starting over here, and it ended up being approved by the board as we go through all of it. So I see that as superintendent.
So you believe that you develop the policies? And once you develop them, we approve them?
I believe that this says develop policy
It
about
does say
school,
develop.
about policy about school facilities.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about if I'm in the school facilities and I'm seeing something that we need to develop a policy around, that's what I'm gonna start doing. That's what I'm gonna start looking at. Like I'm gonna looking at other school districts, looking at what other people may have already, and say, okay, we probably need to bring this to our conversation. That's development. Conversation starts. It didn't start with you all, because y'all.
No, see, that's why, and we don't have to agree, but that's why create, like you all do the first draft. That's the create for me, why I thought that belongs with superintendent. But once you start talking about developing, that's taking that first draft and developing it. What do we need to omit? What do we need to add? What do we need to change the language on? For me, that's that development process.
That's why I said I can go with that.
Oh.
That's why I said I can go with it together as well, so.
Okay. Megan, you had a comment?
Yeah, I'm just listening to the conversation. It sounds like we all agree that there's like what kind of like the investment is from both parties. So like I'm still solidly like both, but I just wanted to like highlight what Dr. Garrison said, like absolutely that development piece. Like in developing and creating those drafts that come to policy, I think obviously are heavy on administration. Like we don't have board members going and looking at other districts and seeing how they do their facility stuff. What we could do though is we could look at other district policies. I mean, I still think it's both, but I just wanted to appreciate what you said.
See, I was told that, you asked a clarifying question, so.
Oh, I heard you say superintendent, that's why I asked the clarifying question.
So, yeah, but I agree with your explanation, as you put it. I could see how you were to set that, yeah.
Okay with that? Okay, with that understanding? Now, this is where that first word, if it's to create, you know, you could say, well, that's the superintendent's job. If it said approve, then it would be a board thing, but just understanding the.
I think that's very like create, develop, approve. I think it's superintendent, both, board. That's how it works in my mind.
Okay.
Who is that? Oh.
I mean, just do with all of these things, the one part that I add is as we go over these activities that we're hitting, because the dynamic is going to address it, like in the day-to-day operations, And anything that comes as a recommendation, or the 7 of you, 6 of you, I'd like you to consider this. And asking people to consider anything, if they're the yes or no at the end, if you ask for consideration, obviously you're wanting that to be approved, but there's the things that people may say, no, we don't want to do that, or no, we're not going to approve that. And that's a, you know, that's a space. And I think, like, in all the work that we do together in that, that's the thing, because there could be a lot of work put into something and a recommendation that goes along with it. But if at the end, the consideration is no, that's, you know, 4, 3, 5, 2, 6, 1, 7, 0, no, or yes, that's for all the work that was put into it, that's still a space. I think that's
But I think one practice that we've had as a board superintendent partnership that I found helpful, if there is something that's gonna be work intensive, let me take it to the full board and get the pulse. Like, hey, is this something you all are interested in supporting, moving forward with? And then if we say yes, then it may go back to superintendent and admin, it may go back to committee, wherever it's appropriate. But I don't think we do really big time intensive projects without getting the pulse, because I would imagine that would be upsetting to pour all your work into this and then you bring it to the board. The board's like, we don't want to do that.
C1.
Setting annual goals for the school district.
Get that together.
Setting annual goals for the school district together. Megan,
I agree. It's together.
Amy,
Together.
Greg?
Yeah.
Okay,
So for interviewing teacher candidates,
You need a letter and a number.
bottom right, 7.
interviewing teacher candidates,
So
superintendent.
Great. Absolutely.
All right, good, John.
Just go.
Investigating staff members.
He needs a letter and a number.
Don't get at the superintendent.
Investigating staff member, superintendent. Good.
Right.
Megan.
Yep, superintendent.
Amy,
Yes.
Greg.
Oh, yeah. Day-to-day work.
Unfortunately, hopefully it's not dated.
Every day.
Too many of those. They don't website.
Oh, Megan.
Call it out, Megan.
Oh man, those pink squares. Has anybody done aisle D yet?
I'll be. How about
D as in David? I don't know, just pick one. I don't care.
How about D1? Responding to complaints about taxes.
Oh, I love that one. I mean, I'm gonna say, sadly for the administration, it should be like a board thing, but I think it's both, right? Because like we both participate in setting the mill rate, like it's that October board meeting that we have. I feel like that's a both.
Okay, Amy.
I say both, kind of the same thinking. If someone comes to me and I'll give you the information that I can, but if you need nuance and things like that, I'm gonna send you to the business office.
Okay, great.
I agree, yeah. I mean, it's the basic things that, you know, we can answer with the understanding that we have, but nuances need to go.
yeah,
To the superintendent.
our responding. First word, but I think it's deeper than that, so.
Together.
So, yeah, I'm in it together, because the response could be in reaction to what, something we have or have not done that has had an impact upon taxes. But they might first send the question or complaint to the
Stick to the card.
No, respond, I mean, they might send it first to the superintendent, or they might write the board member about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that don't come to us.
Right.
Yeah, so,
On behalf, right,
right. It's not representing the school.
right.
I think we're starting this as if everything is coming. to them first, maybe sometimes, and not to me first. So when I look at this, I'm like, I take those things I take all kinds of complaints.
Yeah,
right.
From various, whatever.
right. But being aligned on what the response is
Is key.
so that wait, I talked to Sean, he said this, now I'm talking to you, you're saying that, so having that
I think
consistency.
in sometimes some very technical answers too, like, why did you vote to go to referendum, raise my taxes? I mean, questions like that, this is what we had that vote. It all depends, because sometimes, like I said, that the citizen might get copied on the email to Dr. Garrison. If you have any further questions, in-depth information, there's answers that we try to give to people. But, sometimes too, if they're looking at a portion of their tax bill, and understand why the school district part of what it is. Now that we got a business officer.
Sounds like we're
Come on down, you
together.
might explain that.
On E2,
I'm here together on that. Okay, E2,
yeah,
deciding bus pickoff and drop-off location.
I have never been asked that. I probably have some brilliant solutions because I hate drop off and pick up. I think it's a nightmare. Thank God for more than man. But I'm gonna say that's superintendent.
Okay,
Superintendent.
Superintendent.
thank you. All right, Greg.
C2, evaluating staff, superintendent.
Word.
Superintendent?
Now we know what gets done.
Okay.
For E.
Handling staff time off requests.
No, in normal life, that is not the board. We are not folding in outliers of what was forced upon us. That is superintendent, it is not my turn to answer. The superintendent.
Yeah.
But I do still feel a certain way.
I want you to hold your feelings close as you handle staff time off request.
I said board is off.
No.
Oh, I need to do.
No, superintendent.
I feel like I'm the outside of that one.
So we just.
Yeah, you dodged that one, Drew.
We just did it.
Just let it lie.
Handle some stuff that was.
John.
Joy in the work. Deciding which computer.
He needs a
hardware
letter
to
and
purchase.
a number.
Deciding which computer hardware to purchase.
E3, superintendent.
Megan, superintendent?
Are we still on the PTO one?
No.
Wait, I missed one. Sorry, I got caught up in that moment. Where are we at?
It's over.
Deciding which computer hardware to purchase.
Oh, sorry, it was a little muffled there. Was that computer hardware?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna go superintendent.
Okay.
I'm gonna say all three of you are wrong. That is the board because it says deciding, not recommending, but deciding is synonymous with approving.
No, it's not synonymous. So I would say this, when we look at that one,
Greg hasn't gone.
she just said,
I threw the glove down.
I'm ready to jump on you. I've been waiting on this one.
In love. Bring us home, Greg.
I would place it under a superintendent, because as I look at deciding, the board would actually approve the purchase. We don't necessarily decide to purchase.
Well, we do decide if we're approving it. You decide which one
Yes.
we're gonna go with.
The way I read the question, deciding which computer hardware first, whether we end up with Dells or Macs.
Yeah.
Depending on the size of the purchase, it wouldn't even come to the board. But.
Let's say it's possible.
Okay, listen, so
Yes.
even if it came to the board, I don't think that we would be asked by Dr. Garrison, do you all want the Macs or do you all want the Dells?
I agree. I mean, usually there's an RFP process, and then the administration's like, we looked at X, Y, Z, we recommend Z.
Right, so I think that when they decide to buy the Max or the Dells, because they think the district needs it, they would say, hey, we're bringing this purchase of X amount of Dells to you.
Bringing it as a recommendation.
Right, but they're gonna decide which one to bring to us.
With that clarity, is that okay?
I disagree with that today. I yield to the board.
Last time we thought that was a superintendent responsibility.
Who cares what we did last time? Then why do it again if you want to lean back?
Because
on
you
what
got
we did
different,
last time?
because you got
Then we
different.
should never do it again.
We got one new person, but the rest of us were here. That's why some of this is, that's why I'm going back to that space.
All right, who's up next?
Because,
Okay.
you know, that is one of our board commitments.
It's Greg's turn.
Just a minute, that is one of our board commitments, that over time, we can't change our position.
A3, deciding which teacher or principal to hire, that's superintendent.
Superintendent, John?
Yeah, for me, teacher hire, I put that back in the day-to-day operations of conducting that process, but then again, it came to the board, which is approval, which is different than just decide.
Deciding is approval. That's the board. The this is my opinion. I'm not asking what you think about my opinion. The superintendent recommends and the board decides / approves.
You didn't decide where the bus pickups were, and that's the deciding.
Because that's bus pickup. Bus pickup doesn't come to the
But
board.
it says decided.
Okay, but bus pickup doesn't come before the board. I don't have the opportunity to approve that. I do have the opportunity to approve who's being hired. We do it every first and third Tuesday through employee recommendations.
I think, okay, again, so as I read that as after they have conducted a process, because we don't get.
That's who they recommend. That's the
Right,
process.
But we don't get multiple choices of people. We only get one person's name in front of us. So when I look at that.
But that's what they recommend who should be hired. They don't, just my opinion, they don't decide who's hired.
I
So-
think they decide who they think should be hired, and then we approve the hire, yes or no. I don't think.
Can I wait?
Megan?
Go for it.
Yo, just to weigh in, I think if it said approved, I would agree with Amy, but I think that deciding implies like you've gone through a process and you've made a decision, and the decision was to bring these recommendations to the full board for approval. So that's the way I'm looking at it, and that's where I'm still in the superintendent category.
With that perspective, that clarity on that perspective,
That's not a perspective that I agree with,
okay?
but I yield to the board.
That's super simple.
All right, my turn. So I will say, evaluate the superintendent. Go forward.
John?
So this is an interesting one. Last year, we decided that was a board
Can you
thing.
burn that?
Burn what?
That sheet?
Believe me, no, I'm not gonna burn it. I'm gonna reference what we did last year. Because I'm gonna talk about what I think the change has been in the year.
Okay.
So one, we have a contractual responsibility to provide us, we have contractual responsibility. We have a policy responsibility. But in the process that we're using, we work for CISA 6, the evaluation is not something that's just done to the superintendent, it's something that's done with the superintendent. But, for that purpose, I will keep it at the board level, but I know that our understanding together is that as we're using the CISA 6 model together, it is a process that we do together. But if we didn't evaluate the superintendent, we would not be meeting our contractual responsibilities or our policy responsibilities. So I'm still with that as a board responsibility.
Okay. Right, Megan?
That's why I'm not just burning last year.
Awesome.
Megan, evaluating superintendent, so far people are saying that is the board responsibility.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I'm with the board. Yep.
All right. Finally, give you guys something to do. There we go. All right, where did we leave off? Sorry.
Actually, it's
Megan, you want me to grab one?
Hey, let's go with something with the number 6.
Oh, 6.
6. Oh, here we go. Authorizing staff positions for hire, new, to clarify.
So authorizing feels synonymous with approving. Wait, okay, so are you saying authorizing like the creation of new staff positions?
Authorizing staff positions for hire, for new staff positions.
It didn't exist.
Oh, like it didn't exist. Well, I mean, I'm sure that's something that's recommended by the administration and approved by the board. So I feel like that's both, because it wouldn't come to the board without the superintendent authorizing that, yes, we want to create that position, but then it doesn't get created until the board creates it. So I'm going to say both.
Okay, thank you.
That's the board authorizing, deciding, approving. They are all in the same bubble. That's the board.
The board is the one that has to authorize the position.
So it should be authorized board, yeah.
I would put it together.
May I offer an observation? Dr. Garrison, you lean towards either superintendent or together. That is interesting. So you believe that you help authorize new staff positions?
I mean, I would sit down and look at all the things that we need and really decide like, okay, well, hey, we need this position. I mean, can I just look at it from my responsibility at times, that you all think about.
But you believe you help authorize new positions, like approve new positions?
Because if I didn't think I needed it, I wouldn't be bringing it to you.
No. I'm not talking about recommendation. You believe you help authorize new positions.
Yeah, I do. I don't know how to say it. I think I help. I think without.
Do you vote on whether or not we have a new position?
Well, that's if you're saying that. That's if you're looking at the word authorized.
I am, because that's what's on the
I
sheet,
know, but I told you
authorized.
there's many different definitions before just the word authorized. It's not just one sheer focus on it. It's more. It's like I said, I'm together. I'm together on that. That's why.
That is something, okay.
Well,
Right, well, I'm going to yield to the will of the board. I agree with, I just wasn't sure how nuanced you were getting with the word authorized.
It's about me.
No, I didn't make it seem anyway, I asked a question, I asked you a question, I said, do you believe you vote to authorize staff
But
positions?
another board member also thought that as well.
I'm asking you,
And I said yes.
you believe you vote to authorize staff
Not
positions?
vote, no, that's not what it said. Vote. It didn't say vote.
Well, how do you think something gets authorized without a vote?
Well, this is the same question I gotta ask you all. How does it come to you all without me bringing it?
No, not come to, okay.
I'll give you an example. So on this one,
We wouldn't be authorized because I brought it. I don't know.
on this one, I'm at the board level. Here's an example. We don't currently have a director of equity, inclusion, of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've had one in the past. We don't have one now. If Dr. Garrison brought that to us
In the form of a
in the
recommendation,
form of recommendation, we would either approve it or not approve it.
authorize it or not authorize it?
That would be authorized or not authorized. However, there's another example. That is something that would have been generated by the superintendent. Currently, we don't have a deputy superintendent. In our last study, and we don't have like an in-house legal counsel. But in our evergreen staff staffing report, those were 2 recommendations that an organization of our size might consider. And those also have significant budget impacts and also addresses things like succession that we've not addressed. Those are 2 things that could come directly from the board that we would say, Dr. Garrison, these are things that the board decided that we want. And that would be us authorizing. So all things don't always come from the superintendent, but most things do end up coming from the superintendent. But there could be spaces that the board would come from also. And just as last year, that was a board responsibility. But I think that the sense that I have tonight as we're talking is the authorizing part is the yes or no part. That's why I would put in the board responsibilities.
So with the clarification that authorizing is voting, approving, that would put it as a board responsibility.
It was crazy, I'm just gonna say this again. I also, at my level, and my CLC as a superintendent, I authorize, like, okay, yeah, we probably need to do this. We probably need to bring this to the conversation.
I think you need to be more specific about it. Then you're recommending it, because if you could authorize it, it wouldn't need to come to us. Anything that needs to come to the board, you don't authorize, you recommend.
I think the authorization is to everyone in the organization.
I think
below there.
we all agree on the process. It's the terms that are used that we see them a little differently. Because to us, it's gonna come as a recommendation, but I can see if the executive director of pupil services comes and said, I need 3 more positions, he would have to authorize them to come to the board as a recommendation, right?
And this is
So-
just how it works in my mind.
It's
If you don't have to ask for permission, then you have the power to authorize. If you have to ask someone else for permission, you're not authorizing, you're making a recommendation. And that's not a bad thing.
No.
But if you're authorizing, then we don't have to be involved in it.
So it's the terms of how they're used is what's changing, because I think we agree on
We agree on the process,
the
is what I'm
process
hearing.
itself, but the terms are
These are,
different.
these words,
I think the whole purpose is to do both things, clear the board and have this.
That's right.
So we understand where our team is at.
I don't know that we understand. I think we're just going with how the majority believes, but we're wrong.
I think the conversation, I think
clear after we put it on the board. I understand.
I think we better serve by having the conversation and not having.
We as the collective, so let me ask you again, do you believe you vote to authorize new positions? Because a minute ago you said yes.
I don't vote on approved positions, you know, I don't vote.
Well, a
When
minute ago you
authorize-
said yes.
Okay, no, I said authorizing.
He said
I do
authorize.
I do authorize. I do say yes to certain things at the district level. I do. Right. Now, it comes to you as a recommendation. I clearly understand that.
Okay.
I'm getting caught up in how we're looking at it,
I agree.
and just the first word. That's what I'm doing.
I didn't say that for a minute. Where's, hold up for a minute. I'm just gonna jump on and take a little bit here. Yes, I am.
That's a lot.
No, it's not. So I'm gonna put the Board of Education, this is the community. We can write over this later. All right, let's do parents here. And this is, I'm gonna say Colac Center, the buildings, principals, teachers. So this line is a line of implementation. We have a superintendent, and the superintendent deals with the Colac Center, the administrators, the buildings, the principals, and the teachers. The superintendent deals with the parents, the community, the Board of Education. As Board of Education members, we don't come down here to evaluate individual teachers. That's what we decided. And individual teachers don't necessarily come up here to vote on things that the board is gonna do. The only person who goes across this line of implementation is the superintendent. He lives in both worlds. So some of the things that we're talking about, like when he says authorize, when I hear him say authorize, he's authorizing all these things here at the level that he has authorization for. And there's some things that cross this line where, okay, I'm authorizing that, we're gonna go with these 2 new positions. The board's gonna vote on creating them or not, and that's that space. But in our community where some things are at, in the past, we've dealt with, no, board members, that's not your responsibility. You don't walk through individual buildings and conduct your own investigations of employees. We've had to deal with teachers, principals, building leaders, all like people that, no, you don't do there's 7 people that were elected to make some of these decisions, and that's where it's at. So I think in trying to create our organization to be regular, having our superintendent who lives in both sides of this line of implementation, that's the only person in the district that really operates in that space. And so once we get that clear, we gotta understand it. But when you say authorization, I'm understanding authorizing to a point, to a space. I think that that's a moment of clarity that we have missed at sometimes. Okay.
Yeah, it's authorized when it's below the line, and it's recommended when it comes above the line.
Right.
And so I put in parentheses,
So, yeah.
the approved concept. Knowing the recommendations from, okay.
Is, I'm sorry to interject, but I can't see the board. Are we establishing, like consensus around like the meanings of these words? Because if we're not, I'm wondering like if that's a good next step for future board development to continue to build that consensus and understanding.
The words are facilitating this discussion that we're having, so our team knows how to operate together.
We do not have agreement on words and what they mean.
Right. But
Yeah, so I guess I'm wondering, Drew, do you think like in the future that's worthy work for us as a board? Because we have to, we're not all gonna agree, but I do think we all need to like have a shared understanding. I guess before the night ends, I'm curious, I'd like to hear from Drew, like what he believes the next best step is for us, like in our journey together in collaboration and, effective board governance.
Okay. All right, we'll do. Let's finish, let's clear the board, Sean. Let's clear the board.
right.
D2.
D,
Yeah, D is in dog 2.
dog 2, developing a crisis communication plan.
I'm gonna say that's superintendent.
Great.
Superintendent.
Sean. Megan, superintendent, developing a crisis communication plan.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, she says. All right. Great, Greg.
D, investigating student discipline concerns, superintendent.
Word.
Superintendent.
Yep.
Thank you.
Let's go with C3.
C3, establishing goals for the staff development program.
Establishing goals for the staff development program. I think we have a mentor program. I'm going with superintendent.
Superintendent. Sure. Okay, Megan's development,
Superintendent.
establishing goals.
Same.
Same.
Superintendent.
Okay. All right, John.
C4, addressing complaints about teachers.
Addressing complaints about teachers.
Where do you put that up?
Where do you want this one to go?
Wherever that other addressing one went, that's where I want to put that one.
No, because the other one, I think we put as both together.
No, I think we moved it over to superintendent. There's an addressing complaints from teachers. Yeah, I'll put that one, towards the superintendent, because even in that, because if it came as a citizen about their kid's parent, their student's teacher, I would receive that and I would pass it on to the superintendent.
Okay.
Because I'm not the.
Megan, addressing complaints about teachers.
I guess I didn't realize the other addressing one had been moved because I liked the logic of keeping it as a both. So I think if addressing includes acknowledging, I think it's both. But if it deals with resolving, it's superintendent.
And just so you know, that last one, I put in paren because we clarified it was the resolving component that we had the emphasis on.
But that
Right. Okay.
That wasn't
on the card.
No, I had.
That's awesome. Addressing is both, resolving is the superintendent. So I don't know if you want to rewrite that, but however that ends up, that's where my category. So addressing both, resolving superintendent.
I mean, just like we discussed with the last one, where we're getting complaints from the teachers. that we get and we end up referring them to the superintendent. I mean, it's the superintendent's responsibility to resolve them. But
you might
We address them
respond, you
to a
might
point.
redirect, it was the
Yeah.
terminology we used before.
yeah, so again, addressing it maybe together, resolving would be the superintendent.
And for consistency, I'm gonna put. in
You're gonna rewrite
parentheses,
it?
Resolve, I'm not rewriting it.
Well, that's rewriting it, and I
Yeah,
support
resolve.
it, it's your card.
All right. Where are we? Back to you, Megan? No?
Yes, it is, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Oh, that's okay. What's the furthest column? Does it go all the way to E?
it does.
Oh man, let's see. Is that an E5?
It is
Force it.
Oh,
Address it.
addressing,
Curriculum concerns.
we have approving. Oh, this is.
well,
squirrely.
snap. If it says addressing, I'm gonna go bold.
Do you wanna change that to resolving?
No, because I think sometimes resolving the curriculum concerns.
I mean, so the thing with addressing curriculum concerns is, I mean, we have it in our, I mean, I can't remember if it's a policy thing or if it's a state statute thing, but we have like on the website, if there are curriculum concerns and it's all linked up to DPI, we have a committee that, you know, is a board committee that approves and, you know, takes a look at curriculum and monitors its efficacy. It's, I mean, it's clearly like in the both territory. So like if a constituent calls like a board member and is like, hey, I have a real problem with this curriculum, it's totally within the lane of the board member to, oh, cool, sure, what's going on? And to hear and listen and most likely has some information to respond. And if that came to me, I probably, and I was knowledgeable about it, I would address it and say, if you have additional questions, like, love it if you would like to follow up with their superintendent and, you know, connect you with, you know, people who work directly in this field, right? You know?
Okay, thank you.
Addressing is both.
Yeah, that's a new one, yeah.
You don't have any historical reference.
Again, looking at it again with addressing the concerns, if it comes to the board or a board member, the member may address them. Ultimately, to resolve those concerns, it goes back to the superintendent's office or when the admins deal with that. But as you look at any of the complaints, if it goes to the superintendent and they're not, but like that, the next step is then taking it to the school board. And so it could come to the board at some point. But the main, I think, responsibility would be to resolve that as the superintendent, and to address it, it can be both.
We're leaving it at addressing, it could be together, but we're leaving it at resolve, that's the sense of what we're doing.
I'm gonna go with addressing and together, and I'm only thinking like the nature of how like curriculum things come to, people don't like that the kids are reading X, Y, and Z books, they want those books removed, all kind of things like that. It's gonna end up at the board level with whatever our policy is, and back to the administration to work on something, and it might have to be an action that's taken, but I would leave that one into it together.
Okay.
Now, this is it, like I said again, when people come to us with some of these things, because we've had a chance to talk these things through already, it's gonna make a difference in how we approach them.
Really?
Really.
I think we're, okay, I
All
saw.
right.
Let's say like, what,
Your practice in addressing things has changed because of this conversation?
no, the dynamics of how the six of us as board members and the superintendent, because we've already had a kick at the can, a bite at the apple, we've already kind of talked a little bit. You're coming into that conversation. That might be a real tangible thing in the future, having some discussions already, seeing some nuances of how people are landing.
Well, I can actually forecast that you might use some of the language differences. Now, is that a recommendation? Are you authorizing it? Are we addressing it? Are you, that would help to clarify it. They're purposely with you purposely ambiguous
Right.
to help to clarify the nuances.
Right, but it's
That's where a lot of that stuff happens.
Conversation in the beginning of that type of topic comes.
All right, who's up?
I
Go
don't think it
ahead. Go
matters.
for it.
I don't know who's that.
Approving staff hires.
Yes.
I would say since we're using the word approving in the English system before, but that's a gray area there for me, so I think I would be bringing you someone that I didn't want you to approve.
That's a recommendation.
I know you keep saying that, I know you keep saying that.
I heard your
I know,
consensus.
I understand, I know what definitions mean. I don't need you to keep saying that too, I don't. I
So I'm
understand.
allowed to say,
But
this
you
is the
keep
open.
saying that to me
I'm
over and
not,
over.
I'm saying
I
it,
know,
if
but
you're
it's just to
taking,
me though.
Dr. Garrison, if I was saying it to you, I know your name, I would use it. Either this is an open dialogue or it's not. So
It's open
you,
dialogue.
so, well, then you don't dictate
And I
when
just
I,
And I just said to you, I said board, but there's a gray area for me. So I don't understand what I mean, I said it has to come out eventually. I think this is a gray area for me. Because I wouldn't be bringing you all something I didn't want you to approve.
so I have the right to speak in these conversations, and I don't appreciate you cutting me off, and I don't appreciate you making assumptions. If I was speaking directly to you, I would address you, just like you just called my name, I would call your name.
Okay? And every time I've said something about a word, you directed that conversation to me.
I made a comment.
It hasn't came out as a comment to anyone else.
How do you know who the comment is directed to?
I made the statement. And so that's what I'm confused about. Every single time I make the statement, you ask the question. So then there's
So do you have
gray
a problem
area for me.
with me asking you questions?
If it's the same thing over and over, I understand what the word approving means.
Okay, you believe you approve staff hires?
No, I didn't say I approve staff. That's not what I said.
Okay,
That's not what I said.
So I'm gonna insert myself.
go
Walk
for
us
it.
through this. So the first thing I say is like, what I heard Dr. Garrison say about approving staff hires. She said I would place that with the board. She said that's like a gray area for me. I'm thinking that a gray area is somewhere where you think that's a board and superintendent together, because as you said, you wouldn't bring people forward that you didn't want us to approve. Right. So what I'll say, I don't, and this is the key word, I'm not getting stuck on the words of approve, hire, other things like that. These words are jumping off points that we're using to work our way through. And my example is, that's number 17 last year. Last year as a board and superintendent, the one we had at the time, we all put that in the middle. So I understand that, so what Dr. Garrison expressed is, he said, I'll put that at the board side because yes, in the end, the board will vote to approve to hire candidate X or not. They're gonna come on employee rec and it's gonna get hired or not. But I think last year, when I reflect on what we did last year and the fact that we put that at board and superintendent, even though it says approve, and we worked that out when we had the principal at Fruzen was a space that we worked into that last year. That I could support that in being in the board and superintendent together, because the superintendent is not gonna recommend somebody that they do not want hired, but there are reasons that when it comes to the board, that the board might or might not act on that recommendation in the approval process. So that's one that I understand that it's the board that approves, but in that I can keep it at board and superintendent because of the understanding of how we actually work through that process together. And the part that I want to get to and address the conflict that I think is happening here is I do think that a thing that's important in what I'm watching in this activity as we get there, and which I think is something I see, is the board's responsibilities, the superintendent responsibilities, in that there are certain things that do require board action. And like I said, whether it's 4-3, 5-2, 6-1, or 7-0, it's something that's brought before the board that needs board approval to make it happen. And then there's other things that don't. But there's that space, and I think that's an important part as we look at some of these activities, that we know the work gets done, but what is the nature of that interaction between the board and the superintendent? Because I think these are things that need to be done for the district, that's why I'm recommending them to you. But it doesn't mean that they're gonna get approved just because they got recommended to us. And if they don't get approved, then why not? Well, why was it recommended? So that's a space, and I think that these words and this activity is about, I'll say, the conflict that we have right now. That for me, as I walk into this, I think we're just putting things on the board. I thought that when we come to a place of conflict like this, that is where we would get those things worked out. Because I do think that whether it's in the process of one meeting or if it's over several meetings, every time I say this, you say this. Because to me, that's that place where it's not really gelled and locked about how we're gonna do something.
But I think it's important in how you choose to communicate. And I can participate in this communication in any respectful way that I feel. And for Dr. Garrison to snap at me because he didn't like my comment is inappropriate and it's unproductive.
All right, well, let me address that.
Sure.
One minute first, please. So just, I mean, like, this is one of the things, like, so we addressed this in our comment about our survey. And as we're working together, we're still a productive group, but there are some places we got difference of opinion.
But you shouldn't get snappy at someone because you disagree.
But I think that in the work that we do, my opinion of how I think you're interacting with me, I might feel that the way you're interacting with me is not respectful. And if I feel that it's not respectful and I tell you that, then that's something you have to sit with. If you say you don't like my tone, I might say, I don't want you to police my tone. There's a give and take in all of that. The point that I'm making is as we have these conversations about work that we're all serious about, that we might disagree about, we gotta figure how we're gonna work our way through these things.
That's great, but when I make a comment, I don't think another person has the right to tell me you need to stop repeating that. I think that's unproductive and immature.
And the part that I'm gonna say, I'm gonna take it back to the conflict that we started with in the beginning of the activity.
What was the conflict in the beginning of the activity?
I think you thought the activity was supposed to go one way. And
No,
I thought,
I asked Drew because Drew's facilitating and he said, yes, this
right,
is what we're doing.
but prior to you asking Drew, I was asserting that, no, I think we're supposed to be doing something else.
Okay, well, that's you thinking it should go a different way, not me.
And then Drew weighed in on that. And then we moved forward in what we were doing. We're at another part in the activity where we're at an impasse. I'm gonna yield back to Dr. Garrison. But I think that is the purpose of the activity. And that's why I asked Drew to come back again.
I think getting clarity on the activity is one thing. Telling someone what they need to stop saying is different for me.
Well, I would restate it to be like, maybe like, well, if you're saying it's landing a certain way with me.
That's not what happened.
Well, I mean, things happen imperfect.
So let me put it back on the table again. My original statement was this should go into the board since we're using the word approved. As soon as I said that, your statement came back as, I don't know what the word approved means again.
No, I didn't.
No, that was
my
the
statement?
that was the comment.
What was the comment?
I don't remember the comment.
Okay,
That was
then
the
how
comment.
can you?
Oh, you tell me
It's
the
like
comment. No, you tell me the comment.
You had a
So I can
very
give-
strong reaction, so I'm
Well, I'm
asking
giving
you, what
you-
did I say that gave you such a strong reaction?
Because this time again,
Mhm.
when I made the statement about what the word meant, you made a comment. The
Which I have a
comment,
right to do.
but it's happened multiple times when I have made a comment to me when I'm making the statement. I understand what the words mean. And that's what I understand what the words mean. This activity has brought up some difference of opinions around if we're gonna focus on the word, when, I hate to say this, if we're gonna focus on the word, knowing that these words have multiple meanings, this could go a lot of different ways. But we're gonna focus on just what the definition is based off of what any one of us may believe, then it can go a lot of different ways again. And so I stated it goes to the board, but I believe this is a gray area. Comment came back to me again, Okay, again, comment came again. I'm like, why is this? I understand what the word approve means. Now, you may not like the way I've stated it, but I think it's also some microaggressions and you making this statement every single time. And so for me, that's the way I took it. And so if that was misinterpreted, like I did last time, Mrs. Levy, if that was misinterpreted like I did last time, I apologize to you.
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Well, I apologize to you if that's the way you felt if I was being disrespectful.
Okay, I'm not clear on what you're saying, but my point is, I have the right to comment whenever I would like, and it is my opinion that it's inappropriate for you to tell me to stop making the comment. That's all. Because I'm not telling you to stop saying, no, period. I'm not telling you what not to say. You don't have the right to tell me what not to say.
I understand that, Ms. Levy.
Awesome.
And so I want you to also know though, for me, when a comment is made multiple times to me, I feel like, okay, why are we doing that? For me, that is a micro. For me, at some point, I'm gonna have to say something back in my brain. And if it came off as I was being disrespectful at that moment, that was not my intentions. I want to bring clarity to. I do understand what the word approve means.
That's awesome.
Okay.
I don't deal in microaggressions. I'm very direct. So if there's something that I want to say, I'm very clear on saying it.
Before, Megan and Greg, can you kind of, we've all just experienced the same thing together as we're working and talking. Megan and Greg, can you give a perspective to the conversation we're having?
Well, I think this brings up a really good space about like what are our next steps for, kind of culture work that we need to do. And I think in the past, when there were conflicts, we just acknowledged. I think the best way to handle it is to like acknowledge a conflict. Everybody's like, feelings and thoughts are valid and have a space. And I think at this point, it's kind of taking away from the task at hand. So maybe we can find another space to work through that conflict and grow through it together so that we have a stronger kind of culture and communication going forward.
Good, thanks, Megan.
As a conflict that we've mentioned before, that we mean the same process, but we're using different terms from different points of view as to how it happens. And so that's what spurred on the disagreement. Dr. Garrison did say that would go under board, but it's a gray area for him. And I understand, again, it's that the use of terms for specific definitions are there because, as I mentioned before, everything that the board does is done in conjunction with the superintendent. Nothing is done in isolation. It's the practice we've had. I know boards that don't do it that way, but our practice has been that. And so there has been the use of the terms which is what brought the conflict that's there, is because we're using different terms to mean the same thing. I agree. What Dr. Garrison did keep saying, this is a gray area, or he sees the words used in a different fashion. Amy, you did use, okay, that's a recommendation, and just the use of the terms is what escalated the differences in the conflict that's there. I don't think we're going to resolve it tonight. That it needs to be maybe handled at another time, and it is taken away from what we're doing at this point. But I see both sides in how that conflict happened.
I think it's the same I think, listen to what you were saying, I think we're kind of in the same place as we were at an earlier time on a similar issue. And that, and I think that working through the activity as we have, I did think that some of these items might produce such feelings as we will work our way through.
And I think it's important, that's why we agree how we communicate with each other when we disagree. and not escalating in our tone.
And
Well, we have, well, the thing is, what I say about that is that we have a successful conflict resolution cycle that worked once. And, we have, we've made expressions and we know the place to work from. We got difference of opinion of how people are sitting with how, the one part that I'll go back to, I think Drew said this to us before in some of our work, is that I don't have control over other people. I only have control over my response to what happens as we're sitting at the table together. How I respond is what I have to hold. And we have to find out the way to bring it to the attention of the group that this is happening and I don't want this to happen this way. Let's get this fixed and situated so we can deal with that.
so I'll just make two comments, observations. This discussion has turned more into what is the definition of a word and where does it fit based on the literal definition of the word, then understanding the process of the activity that's been mentioned. And you can go any of those ways, but was the intent, was not to get a definition of approve, recommend, resolve, etc. It's like when this thing happens, are we aligned on the journey to make it happen productively? And so where this fits, frankly, is almost secondary because of depending on the definition could go several places. As long as we know when it happens, we talked about this, we know where it goes. Part one.
So, 12 plus 12 is 24. 48 minus 24 is 24. We can get to the same place, but we're getting there different ways sometimes, and that takes time. We gotta work that.
Yeah, so to me, this is less about trying to be right, it's just trying to be clear. That's it.
Be clear.
And so it's okay how we get there. The second thing is, and I don't know how often it happens, but when there are some different perspectives or people are feeling slighted, disrespected, whatever, it's different in a development section, but that's a great opportunity for a one-on-one, in my opinion, right? I mean, instead of let's all work this through, if it's two people, whatever, and not having necessarily 4 or 5 people kind of watch it play out. Now, depending on your conflict management framework or model and how you use, but generally speaking, let's have a conversation offline, make sure we're clear about that.
I think I said what I said, and Lisa said, Lisa said, the extra stuff was the extra stuff that happened.
What was the extra stuff, just for clarification?
So the other conversations, one that President Levy brought into the conversation, and one that Greg brought into the question, one that Megan Miller brought into the conversation, that was the extra stuff in my brain. Which that stuff also takes time. I don't have a problem with calling Mrs. Levy knows that, and having offline conversations. Now, I also don't think Ms. Levy had a problem calling me. So, those things can happen as well.
I just think it's just, if we got a different perspective, if I feel I've been rubbed or disrespected, say, we'll have a one-on-one on that. We'll figure this one out. Now, what's the next agenda item? Keep
Because I also want to be noted that I also brought the apology to the table as well. If that was the impression.
I know that's really important to you. Acknowledged.
I want you to know that though, because that's not, so we disagree like we did, don't mean that. Like it's bad.
But that's like a pattern.
Okay, well,
You'll kind of blow up and then apologize.
Well, I think you also will make some statements, Mr. Lee, that you may believe are just being direct, but they also are not.
Awesome, thank you.
Which one you got next? I think we're ready, we're gonna.
Determine what items are on the board agenda.
that's it together, because it happens with the superintendent and
That's together.
Right.
and the board.
I agree together.
The board members suggest items too, and suggest that meetings be short.
Adopt policies about school facilities.
Adopting the policies is the role of the board.
Adopt and approval.
Right. But we don't do it in isolation, so, but the act of adopting is the board.
I agree.
Words in there. That's a new one.
Presenting referendum information to the community.
They did it together.
It's together, but it depends on the comfort level of the board, whoever is going to do it.
Yeah, so in this one, I mean, the superintendent, as we did this year, superintendent is the front facing, doing the work for the district. We facilitate, convene the meeting, but our superintendent present that information. I think that is one that we have to determine what roles we're gonna take on in that process.
So I'm thinking of your comment, a lot of it's the back room, it's aligning these together, but then there's the face forward piece, and in this case, superintendent's that face.
I mean, it really is. I still think it's together at times, but superintendents do a lot of that work by themselves.
What are your thoughts, Amy?
I'm fine wherever it's placed.
I think it's like the superintendent's job to kind of be like the figurehead of the district. So, I mean, it really should, obviously he's involved. I think I'd be fine with putting it either in both or superintendent, with like the implication that obviously the board is going to be speaking out informationally just the way we would about anything else informationally. So I'm fine with both.
But board members do play a role in this, right?
Right, I would go with together, right?
Absolutely.
I would parse together. I mean, I got a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails
Sure.
asking about the referendum questions. Well, Dr. Garrison was the front person for the district. I think we all responded in many ways and talked with many people about it.
60 building relationship with municipalities. I think that's
Building relationships with municipalities.
together.
Determining specific vendors for projects.
RFP process.
I look at determining as approving, and I think that's the board.
Are we approving the RFPs that go on?
Well, I don't think we're gonna agree on what words mean tonight. In my world, determining is approving, is adopting, is deciding.
Do you have a certain like dollar limit where you kind of say, this is yours, superintendent?
We do
There's a,
for policy.
okay.
Right, per policy, there's a limit that any expense over that has to come to the board for approval. Typically, that comes with a recommendation as to the vendor and the reasons why it is there. Again, looking at that definition, by concept, I think it's something that literally comes out of the superintendent's office with the recommendation to the board, who then ultimately makes the final decision.
Like the food service when we went Chartwell over here.
Right.
Architectural firm for a building.
Right, we didn't, pick.
So that would be
pick that.
determining.
So I think this is where I'm at. These words are verbs. They represent
Agent
actions.
ing, yes.
They represent actions that need to be taken. I am not only looking at the verb, I'm looking at the rest of the STEM. Like the example, like our food service vendor or our architectural firms. I know RFPs are put out. In the end, the recommendation was made by the superintendent, you should go with X. And we voted. So in that determining space, I can see that as the board taking the final action. But we didn't, even though we were looking at several others that were there, we were going, he didn't make a recommendation, well, you can pick any of these three. That was not the recommendation. And when they received the RFPs, those people that responded, they had multiple people and they came to one.
But that is what happened with, and it-
I mean, it is what happened with, I'm listening.
with food services.
It is. But they let us know that Chartwell was the one who won in their process.
That was a recommendation.
Right.
And we determined, which I'm just saying, that's what happened with food service. You can feel however you want to feel about this.
So I don't see the difference between what you just said and what I said.
Okay.
So the part about determining the vendors determine if they're gonna get their process to receive our business or not. So the way that I would just put that one, for today, I would put that one in together. Because there's an action that we're gonna approve and there's a part where they're gonna recommend.
So that pattern that you talked about, determine, recommend, approve.
Right, it's the superintendent's office that determines which recommendation comes to the board.
And as I go back to, as a baseline, if we put that in the superintendent's responsibilities last time, but what we're talking about right now, our present conversation, is those processes working together. So,
I'm thinking about the RFP process, and so I think that's important.
It's an RFP.
That's what I'm looking at.
Mm-hmm.
That we put together the processes or protocols of what we're looking for. And the vendors, they submit that to us, we go through the interview process, we, so determine specific vendors for projects, that would be. That's what I look at. From RFP.
I can receive it on that side.
That's the process that happens, right? That, yeah, that then comes to the board for final approval. Right. Like so much of this, the legwork and all the
Right.
background work comes out of the
Right.
superintendent's office. And the board does the final approval.
Yeah, approval, right.
Right.
Okay, so verbiage aside, as long as we understand that flow. All right, we should wrap up here. Approving dollars to provide meet technology needs for districts.
Because it's approving the dollars, that's the board.
I agree.
Yep.
Go board on that.
Responding to requests for new programs from the community.
Put it together.
So what would be an example of a request for a program?
We had some requests about driver's ed. I'm trying to think of another one. So driver's ed is the one I think of right now.
So do you have a process with that example in mind, and how does that play out?
So like curriculum, like the whole curriculum proposal process. And then things that are not happening that people would want to happen in our community. They'll either respond directly to board members or during public comment. There's also a process where people are probably writing the superintendent or people that they know are responsible within the organization. And it can come both ways. I don't think that the response does not mean, we're not talking about an automatic approval or creation or establishment of it, but the responding to there's community interest on both sides. And I think it lands in both places.
I mean, I think it's like a lot of the other ones. If we get the request, the information comes to us, we may respond to it while forwarding the information to the superintendent's office, who would then take that under consideration. Anybody that should come back with a recommendation
Okay.
would be the typical process.
So I think we're together on this.
Together.
Agreed.
Developing a corrective performance plan for a staff member.
That's going to be superintendent.
Establishing policies for staff evaluation.
See the policy part.
The policy part.
I would say it's both because of how the policy committee works.
Yeah.
We do have to evaluate the staff and that's.
Yeah, well, we talked about that. So what we did last year is we said establishing the policies for staff evaluation, i.e. that it should happen, and that it does happen. We put that at the board level last time. So I think it is our intent as a board that the staff is evaluated.
That's together.
Well, it's, the recommendations for most of those comes through the administration to the policy committee and then to the full board for approval. So I mean, the process is there. So
Are we saying establishing is what you are approving? Or are we saying establishing is what we are working towards?
I mean, if I'm looking at to establish the policies, it would be a joint piece because it's recommended, the policy committee takes a look at it, works with it until it's ready and approves it, and then moves it on to the full board for final approval. So approval piece is the board's responsibility. But as we establish,
Agreed.
put it together, that's done together.
Let's put together your policy committee. Advocating with legislators on school policy issues.
We do.
I think that's both.
Yeah, both.
This is it, money. So I'm gonna say both, however, and that's what we did last time, but I'm gonna make a distinction. So advocating with legislators on school policy issues. I'm one board member, so even in my advocating, I've gotta advocate what our board is considering. And even, and not Sean, and even in the superintendent, his personal feelings aside, he's advocating on behalf of the district, not just what Dr. Garrison will want. So I think that's a space for board members and administrators to keep in mind and what we do and how we do, because we're just speaking for the whole district.
This is advocating with legislators on school policy issues.
Right, this is what I'm saying, is like, what you go and say to those legislators on those school policy issues, are you speaking on behalf of yourself? Or are you speaking on behalf of the school district of Beloit?
What happened before Day with the Capitol?
What'd you say?
What happened before Day at the Capitol?
I don't know. Don't tell me what you're saying.
What is for day at the Capitol?
Day at the Capitol was when school board members and superintendents and staff went and advocated at the Capitol on school policy issues. So who does that? That's both.
Right, but I think the different thing that I'm saying, and I want to make sure all people are hearing, is my individual thoughts as I go to the Capitol are different than what the thoughts for the school district of Beloit are. And even though I'm
Could be, yeah.
they could be, and even though I'm the president of the Board of Education, like, I don't issue statements that are not in the vein of what you all want to be said on your behalf. And so even as we talk about the superintendent advocating also, you don't just advocate your own personal space, because there could be an issue where Dr. Garrison is in one place, but the board is in another place. But if he's speaking for the school district of Beloit, advocating for our legislators, totally different than how we actually want him to advocate for our legislators. That could be the space. And that could happen to any of us on the issue. That's why I'm taking that point to express that.
So I think advocating for policy issues is responsibility of both. But if we're doing it as this is what I believe that it is. I need to make sure that I identify, this is my opinion, and I'm not representing the board if it's different from what the board does. And so
So
that's
it's
just
both,
part, so it's both,
It's a both,
right?
But that's a
Yeah.
distinction I think we have to understand.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So as you have pointed out multiple times, there have been some differences from 18 months ago and different cast of characters. It could be because we're looking at the verbs differently. It could be that we're just revisiting and clarifying the thinking on this. In the 15 or 20, whatever districts I've worked with, no two are the same. Because through their discussion, they've defined, what it means. What approval, resolve, redirect, et cetera means. And as long as they are clear about that, where it falls on the grid to me is kind of secondary. It's just making sure we got it. And it sounds like in most of the issues, you have a process, you know that the path. And this just helps to maybe clarify and to make sure those paths are really clear. So that was the intent.
And we pretty much ended up in the same places that we were last year as well. But I think with, like I said, the conversation with a new team, and even as we're, and this is only 4 of our 6
Right.
tonight. But I think the conversation is important.
That was the
I think too, it's important to know though that so far, I don't think I went outside of any norms that the board have had prior to me coming in. I went with what the standard with what was ever left in an establishment. I just went with that thought.
Right, I don't think, no, but I think that's the important part of, like, we continue to talk about, like, the growing of the team is, like, when you come in, all right, this is, when you come in observationally, this is what you all have in place prior to getting here. But you're also a part of the team now too. So how we all, working is different because you got different people at the table. We have to work that. That's a process that we have to get. We got to get clarity, even to the point of conflict.
Since that was specifically brought up, I actually disagree. Like Saturday, when we had graduation, one of the questions was, oh, well, we didn't confer the diplomas. That's usually like the board meets Saturday morning, we call it to order. And Megan was explaining the process, and your response was, we don't do that here. And so that was unique for me, for you to tell the 2 most senior board members who have engaged in this practice when Megan was explaining it, we don't do that here. When that's not the case, I thought that was interesting that you would make that statement.
So when you say, I made a statement, we don't do that here.
Yeah.
I don't recall making that statement, we don't do that here.
Okay, could we ask Megan, because she's on the line, she was present.
I would love to have this conversation offline.
Okay.
good. Fair, yeah.
I thought the point was to reach clear, okay.
The space that I'll make again in the conversations is not that conflict won't happen. I think that conflict will happen when we're working together. We talked through some activities tonight, and we see a space where there's a difference of opinion. But, what Drew has suggested is if we come into a model space, a conflict model, a conflict management model is, hey, let's have a one-on-one, because we're in a different space right now, and then let's proceed. So I think that is something to, because overall, this is about how we work together.
I thought this was the space to do that, but I see that is not, and that's
I mean, I say like that, you brought something up.
No. I responded because something was specifically brought up. I didn't bring it up.
Correct, she brought up, Mrs. Lee
Does
brought
the
up,
application point.
Ms. Lee brought up, because I made the statement that I went along with what has been done here in the past.
Correct.
And when Ms. Lee brought the statement up that allegedly I made, there was some clarifications on what I want to make, but then Megan Miller jumped in and said it was offline. And so I would be open, I don't.
Well, Megan didn't jump in. I asked her if that, because I'm very clear that that's what you said.
Okay.
And you are saying you did not say that. And Megan was also there. But it sounds like this is not the space to get clarity on, and it is what it is.
And I would be open to that, but that's not what we decided to do.
So what I'll say in that space of, for the most part, we've not deviated from many things that are in place. I think that when you have a new person on the team, and there's some of us who have done some things before together, and that's, I think that's the general point is, the four of us tonight, and then the six with Brian Anderson, we've had a year to work together and do some things on the board in a time before Dr. Garrison was here. Dr. Garrison comes to the team with his professional experiences, through his years of work, not having worked with this team. And we're doing the routine things that happen in a school year. And there come to some things that, he's done it this way in his places in the past, and this is how we do it here. And we've come to, we've had an expulsion hearing, we've had graduation. We can name all the first because it's our first trip around the Mulberry Bush together. And there's some differences and there's some similarities, and there are points to talk about how are we gonna handle this. But like I said, as we, put different items there, that's it's gotten us to a space. And then I think that, one of the things that I'll take out of this is, just go back to when we experienced the moment of conflict, we paused, I facilitated, as the board president, I facilitated us to a space. But I think that we also have a space that we think is appropriate if people are having conflict for them to talk one-on-one.
Well, that was just one person's perspective.
Exactly, that wasn't a decision, because it's fine for a statement to be made, but when I say no, that has not always been the case, it's let's take it offline.
Right.
Well, you asked Megan, and Megan said, let's have a conversation offline. She chose not to participate. We go back to the responses again. What I shared with Drew said is, we can't control other people. We can only choose how we respond.
Yes.
She didn't know you were gonna ask her that.
I didn't know I was gonna bring it up.
Okay, but she chose not to. Dr. Garrison said so my point altogether is, even teams that work together have to understand how are we gonna handle conflict. And then you chose, as in that space, you said, this is not gonna be the place.
No, I didn't choose that. We can move forward. It's fine.
But I just want to say, I don't mean to impose, have it offline, because sometimes you don't want to have it offline. You say, no, we got to have it right now. Let's
be
do it.
transparent.
It's like, okay, that's fine too. So I didn't mean to impose the offline.
Oh, no, I didn't think you, not totally offline part. I took to the part that you said about individuals having one-on-one conversations. And since none of our board members pushed back against that, it does seem that we're open to people having one-on-one conversations when there's conflict.
Well,
That's kind of where I
at
thought
least
that
consider that an option whenever occurs, whatever the conflict or point of disagreement. Just say, do we want to do this now? Or is this appropriate for an offline conversation? Either one is fine, but just know that the offline is an option. Otherwise, if you have two people, is it okay for 3 or 4 or 5 of us to hang around while that's happening?
Is it necessary?
Yeah, well,
I think in some cases it is, when people don't remember things the way they occurred, then it's helpful to have everyone who was present participate. It would be great if 2 people had a conflict and they could just have a discussion and resolve it, but sometimes that's challenging.
Agree.
I'd agree.
All right. Well, we had some texture in this.
No, that's why we have a board development consultant. We want to make sure we have a healthy relationship with each other. And look, in our data from 21, 22, 23 shows that has been successful.
Right.
And we have we wanted to get this activity in early. We couldn't get it in February, that year, so in November. We went over the collective commitments. And then we're coming to the close of the first school year, but we're getting ready to start the second space. And I said we have texture. But we'll sit down and we'll come up with what our next goals of our board development is, and make sure that we have tools to maintain productive relationships, to do the work that we have to do.
And one thing that just, as I heard the highlights of school perceptions, this effective and efficient board meetings, I think that's an interesting one to unpack at some point.
Some things take time. A mild understatement.
Yeah.
Some things are gonna take some time.
Right. But I mean, I can see
And some things take more time than
others.
Yeah.
Well, some things take the time that it takes the people. The best way I would say it is like this. This team is the current 6 school board members that we have and Dr. Garrison. And what another 7 people could do is what another 7 people could do in the time that they can do it. The time that it takes the 7 of us to do something is the time that it takes the 7 of us to do something. But all of us are in a relationship with each other. So it doesn't matter who else could do something differently, they're not here. We are.
I would just push back slightly and I would use policy as an example. And Greg, if I start lying, you jump in and cut me
I
off.
won't do that.
I think we have robust agendas and policy, and I think we find a way to be efficient and effective.
I'll say this.
Greg,
about
would you
that.
agree,
I would
disagree?
I agree. And I'm gonna say that the human relationship part of schoolwork is not the policy of schoolwork. The human relation part is, I think this, you think that, and we disagree.
We tackle all that in policy. I think the human relation is the through line of all of the work, whether it's in committee or whether it's the full board.
How I feel about you and how you feel about me, and how we interact together in the group, and that's for everybody in the group, that is gonna affect the momentum and the speed that we get things done in the group.
I would briefly disagree because I'm an adult professional, and however I feel about you, I don't let that spill over into how we engage in the work.
I think how people interact with each other affects the work and the time that the work takes. And the feeling that all people have as they're involved in the work.
Awesome.
All right. Megan, are you still there?
I am, and I was just gonna. I've really appreciated the discussion. I think it's helped me kind of see like where our strengths are and kind of where our opportunities are. And I appreciate, because I know my processing style can be a little lengthy, and I just really appreciate how everybody like helps me feel respected in our discussions. And I appreciate the room that we give each other to find that. So thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Megan. Amy, final comments for this evening?
I don't have anything new to say, but thank you for offering me space.
Thanks. Great.
I guess just what I've said before is that, we work together as a team, and whatever words we want to use, I think we all understand the process that's followed, whether we use the same terms or not. We all agree on the process that's there. The first part is we looked at the board evaluation. I think we know what we need to work on. And it's real clear what those steps are. So now we just need to figure out what we're going to do to address those.
Okay. Great. Dr. Garrison?
I think the greatness about any team is the opportunity to keep growing. And so, you don't land it perfect. You just don't land it perfect. I think you strive for that. Keep striving for that opportunity to be as close as you can to it. But I think there's no win in perfect, as over time, I think we'll continue to grow and really understand each other's opportunities to grow.
Good, thank you. John?
I'm good. I think I've made the statement.
Okay, good. Well, thank you. It's 8:30 and we said about 2 hours, so we.
About 2 hours.
Thank you, Drew.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. All
Thank
right.
you, Drew. Really appreciate you.
Is there a German on the agenda? I can't see. the
I
agenda.
know. Yeah.
Yes, there is.
I move to adjourn.
So move, second.
It's been moved by Board Member Greg Snyder, seconded by Board Member Amy Levy. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Hi.
Aye. All right, so we're adjourned at 8:37 p.m.
Thanks again, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Megan.
Still technically counts as light.
Yeah.
Does it?